Chapter 3253. Yun Yao, Jiku, Lin Shui, and the others had seen the evolution of the samsara killing formation and were shocked and excited. But at this moment, when they saw the transformation of the defensive formation with their own eyes, they were still shocked and amazed. It was Ji Tianxing who opened everyone's eyes to the profoundness of formations and the wonders of changes. Most importantly, everyone had participated in the setting up of these two mystical formations. That sense of honor and pride was unprecedented. After the black tortoise god-sealing formation stabilized, Ji Tianxing ordered, "Everyone has worked hard. Go back and rest. Just leave the rest to me." Lin Shui, godly lord blood illusion Zhenhong Niefeiyun, and the others had used up too much divine power and urgently needed to recuperate. Everyone greeted Ji Tianxing and entered the divine ship in Jiutian 10 Absolute's pagoda to recuperate. Not only Bai Long, Ji Wushuang and the others, even Yun Yao and Jiku were exhausted. The two originally wanted to accompany Ji Tianxing to face the upcoming danger. But they could not resist Ji Tianxing's persuasion and returned to the distorted spacetime to recuperate. In the sky, only Ji Tianxing was left. He released his divine sense to investigate the situation at the gate of the divine palace. After observing for a while, he smiled and said to himself, "It seems that guy still needs a long time to break the samsara killing formation. I have to use this time to quickly recover my divine power." Previously he had set up formations repeatedly and his divine power was very empty. He urgently needed to replenish it. Seeing that the Green Jade Palace was temporarily safe, he also entered the distorted spacetime to recover his power. Outside the gate of the divine palace, when the five-colored light curtain that covered the sky began to fluctuate violently and transform, Divine King Yank was also awakened. He hurriedly stopped breaking the formation and retreated 100 miles away. He observed vigilantly. With his previous experience, he did not dare to underestimate the formation of the divine palace. He could only wait and see. In just a few minutes he witnessed the transformation of the defensive formation with his own eyes. 12 small formations merged into the large formation and caused a myriad of changes. After understanding these changes, he was dumbfounded and revealed a look of disbelief. 12 small divine formations can merge with the original great formation and transform into a brand new, even more powerful divine formation? What is this operation? Formations can be upgraded like this? Divine King Yank was a little confused. He was so shocked that he was dizzy and his heart was raging waves. Ever since he had broken through to the Divine King realm, he had spent a long time studying formations. But this was the first time he saw such a formation with his own eyes. It was simply an eye-opener and he had a new understanding of formations. After the shock he quickly calmed down. Damn it! The defensive array of the Divine Palace had just been upgraded and transformed. I was Divine King's divine formation. I Divine King, Ken. Why did this king only focus on the array at the gate of the Celestial Palace and not think of directly breaking the defensive array? When God King Rock realized this problem, he was immediately filled with regret and frustration. It's those damned ants. They misled me. He turned his head and glanced at Yen Tiangang and the others in the distance, unable to vent his anger. Yen Tiangang and the others also saw the transformation of the defense formation and were shocked. Divine King Yank's cold gaze swept over them and they all shivered. Their hearts were filled with fear and unease. They did not know that Divine King Yank was venting his anger on them in order to shift the blame. At this time, Divine King Yank faced the Divine Palace's gate and said loudly, "Which Divine King is setting up the formation in the Divine Palace?" "This Divine King Yank is the Tianchuan Territory Lord. I just witnessed your method of setting up the formation with my own eyes. I am very impressed. Please show yourself." Divine King Yank's tone was very solemn and serious, as if he was asking to see a divine king with a higher status. He had no choice but to do this to test the Green Jade Divine Palace. The matter was already in front of him. The reincarnation killing formation at the gate and the black tortoise godseal formation that had just completed its transformation were all set up by that divine king. That divine king was currently in the Green Jade Divine Palace. Divine King Yank wanted to ascertain the other party's identity before deciding what to do next. However, the Green Jade Divine Palace was deathly silent. Not a single sound came out. Divine King Yank frowned and shouted again, "You don't want to see me? Very well, then please answer this Divine King's 2 questions." First, what is your relationship with Divine King Azure Jade? Why are you helping him? Second, Divine King Azure Jade stole this Divine King's treasure. This Divine King chased him all the way here. Do you still want to protect him? Divine King Yank was very sure that the person who set up the formation was not Divine King Azure Jade. He even secretly guessed that the person who set up the formation was very likely the Tianbei territory lord. This was because he had asked Yen Tiangang. There was only one intermediate Divine King in the entire Tianbei territory. In the Tianbei territory, offending the Tianbei territory lord was definitely not a wise thing to do. Therefore, Divine King Yank decided to use peaceful means before resorting to force and try to reason with him first. If he could not reason with him, he would fight with his fists. However, the Azure Jade Divine Palace was still silent. No one answered. Unfortunately, Divine King Yank's consciousness was temporarily unable to penetrate the defensive formation and find out what was going on inside the palace. If he could see, he would discover that the palace was empty. The Divine King he had guessed was not present. There was only a black divine pagoda in the sky. After a long time, Divine King Yank's patience ran out. He shouted with an indifferent expression and a cold tone, "Since you don't want to answer, then don't blame this Divine King for taking action. Wait until this Divine King breaks the formation, then I will talk to you face to face." With that, Divine King Yank continued to use Array Dao divine abilities to try and break the Samsara killing formation. He knew that the Samsara killing formation was of a higher grade and harder to break. In comparison, the newly evolved Black Tortoise Godseal formation should be easier to break. However, he had already deduced a way to break the Samsara killing formation. It would waste even more time to observe and study the Black Tortoise Godseal formation. Continuing to break the Samsara killing formation was a wise move. Swoosh. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Thousands of rays of divine power shot out like a rain of arrows and entered the gates of the divine palace. Divine King Yank's all-out effort to break the formation was extremely powerful. Not far away in the sea of clouds, Yen Tiangang and the others were filled with anxiety and were discussing through voice transmissions. Ancestor, the Divine Palace's defensive formation just completed its transformation and upgrade. This means that the Divine King who set up the formation is in the Divine Palace right now. Are we going to continue watching the show? What if that Divine King isn't Tianqing but the Domain Lord? If the Domain Lord sees that we help the foreign races deal with Divine King Azure Jade, he will definitely clean up the sect and kill us, right? Since Divine King Yank is focused on breaking the formation, why don't we take the opportunity to escape? Yeah. This is a battle between Divine Kings. We don't have the right to participate. The four experts' hearts pounded and they all wanted to retreat. However, Yen Tiangang was stubborn and his attitude was very firm. We can't escape. If the person who set up the formation was the Northern Heaven Domain Lord, he would have shown himself and spoken already. The more mysterious that person is and refuses to show himself or speak, the more I believe that it is Tianqing's doing. Chapter 3254. Although the four experts had the intention to retreat, they still followed Yen Tiangang's lead. Since Yen Tiangang did not retreat, they could only stay and observe. Time flowed by. A day passed quickly. Yank Divine King tried the second method to break the array, but he only persisted for 10 hours before failing. Then he tried the third method to break the array. This time he persisted for a total of 14 hours and still continued. He did not fail. The process of breaking the array was still smooth. This made Yank Divine King see the light at the end of the tunnel. His confidence multiplied and he worked even harder to break the Samsara killing array. He felt that he had already completed 70% of it and was not far from successfully breaking the array. At most, he would need another 6 hours to successfully break the Samsara killing array and open the God Palace's door. At the same time, within the God Palace, 9 Heavens Tenju Pagoda suddenly flashed with white light. Ji Tianqing appeared in the sky. Swoosh. He stood in the sky, his white robe looking brand new. His long hair hung behind his waist and was combed meticulously. Not only had he recovered his former glory, his strength and aura had also reached their peak state. At this moment, although he was not a divine king, he was more like one. He stretched out his hand to grab the 9 Heavens Tenju Pagoda and kept it into his body. A day has passed. That fellow should have found the way to break the array, right? After all, he's a 4th stage realm divine king. It's not to the extent that he doesn't even have this bit of ability. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself and released his divine sense to investigate the situation at the God Palace's door. When he saw that Yank Divine King was casting a technique to break the array and that the Samsara killing array's power had dropped greatly, he instantly frowned. Oh, that clumsy-looking blockhead is actually smarter than I thought? Ji Tianxing was rather surprised. He continued to observe for a while and his frown deepened. I didn't expect that he really deduced the method to break the array. Although this method is a little clumsy and complicated and it can't completely break the Samsara killing array, he has already completed half of it. However, he had already completed half of it. In at most 14 to 14 hours he would be able to open a gap in the formation. No, I have to think of a way to stop him. I absolutely cannot let him succeed. Ji Tianxing's face was a little gloomy and he was a little worried. After all, Chao Qingyu was still unconscious and recuperating while Lan Er was still in seclusion. If the Yank God King were to attack the Divine Palace, it would be difficult for him to stop him alone. Previously he had wanted to remain mysterious and mislead Yank into thinking that there was a mid-level Divine King in the Divine Palace. But now he couldn't care less. He could only make a move himself and appear as soon as possible to stall for time. Shua. A white light flashed. Ji Tianxing teleported 100 miles away and appeared above the gate of the Divine Palace. He stood at the top of the gate on the cornice of glazed golden tiles, looking down at the Yank God King. Staring at the Yank God King, he suddenly narrowed his eyes and a playful smile appeared on his face. Ha! I didn't expect to see the Yen clan here. What a surprise! Ji Tianxing said playfully with his hands behind his back, assuming the posture of an unfathomable expert. The Yank God King, who was in the middle of breaking the formation, naturally sensed his presence. However, the Yank God King planned to ignore him and focus on breaking the formation. However, when he heard Ji Tianxing's words, when he heard the words Yen clan, his body instantly shuddered. His mind was disturbed and his hands froze in midair. Just like that, the formation he was trying to break was interrupted. He subconsciously raised his head and looked at Ji Tianxing, who was at the top of the gate, with a look of vigilance. Who are you? The Yank God King narrowed his eyes and asked in a deep voice, How do you know about the Yen clan? At this time, Yen Tiangang and the others in the distance also sensed Ji Tianxing's appearance. The 5 godhoods immediately focused on Ji Tianxing. After seeing his appearance, Yen Tiangang was overjoyed and couldn't help but want to laugh. The Heaven-Splitting Palace Master, Towering Wind Pavilion Master, and Lei Qianjie were also shocked and found it unbelievable. Heavens! It really is that bastard. Ancestors' foresight is godly. This junior is full of admiration. That kid is still in the God Palace. He was the one who set up 2 king-grade god arrays. This is unbelievable. It's hard to imagine that we've provoked such a terrifying enemy. The 4 experts were full of admiration for Yen Tiangong's accurate judgment. At the same time, they also accepted the fact that Ji Tianxing could set up king-grade god arrays in their shock. Thinking about how they were enemies with Ji Tianxing and fought for so long, they still felt fear. Yen Tiangong's emotions were far more than that. He said excitedly, It's just as I expected. That kid set up king-grade god arrays with the strength of a divine lord. He's truly a genius. However, no matter how monstrous or heaven-defying he is, it's useless. When the Yank God King enters the God Palace, his time of death will come. We'll be able to get our revenge soon. The 4 experts also expressed their agreement and looked forward to it. As they discussed, they paid attention to the movements at the God Palace's gate and listened to the conversation between Ji Tianxing and the Yank God King. Hearing the Yank God King's question, Ji Tianxing's smile became even more enigmatic. Kid from the Yen clan, tell this king, where are you from? Ji Tianxing's aura was mysterious and unfathomable. He also had the attitude of a ruler who looked down on the world and looked down on all living things. His words also sounded old and experienced. The Yank God King was stunned and revealed a look of deep wariness. Ji Tianxing saw that he was silent and asked, You're not going to tell me? Do you think this king doesn't know that you're not a God King from the boundless heaven continent but from another continent? The Yank God King frowned and subconsciously replied, So what if I am? You haven't answered this, king. How do you know about the Yen clan? Ji Tianxing still avoided answering and said in a playful tone, The Yen clan originates from the north of the primal chaos continent. They are the descendants of ancient gods and have a true king-level bloodline. Kid, to what extent did Chao Qingyu offend you? You actually left the primal chaos continent and crossed 2 seas and a continent to pursue him here? In fact, Ji Tianxing was also not sure what the current situation of the god realm was like. What he said were all memories from 1,000 years ago. At that time, there were 4 continents in the god realm, and the primal chaos continent was one of them. However, the primal chaos continent and the boundless heaven continent were very far apart. There were 2 seas in between and only God King experts could cross. As for the current situation of the god realm and how many continents there were, he was not sure. He said those words to test the waters. Unexpectedly, the Yank God King did not refute him. Instead, his eyes widened and he roared even more emotionally. Who are you? Why do you know so much about my clan? If you have a relationship with my clan, why are you helping that bastard Chao Qingyu? Ji Tianxing still avoided answering and asked with a faint smile, You're Yank, right? If this king is not wrong, you should be the son of Rock Dragon, right? After so many years. Is your father dead? Chapter 3255. When Ji Tianxing's voice fell, the entire place became deathly silent. Yank God King was dumbfounded on the spot. His eyes were wide open as he stared at Ji Tianxing, unable to say anything for a while. Yan Tiangang and the other 4 in the distance were also completely stunned. No one expected Ji Tianxing to say such words. Not to mention why he knew about the Yan clan. Not to mention whether Yank God King's father was Rock Dragon or not. Just the words "Is your father dead?" were enough to frighten them. How could he say such words? Do you have a grudge with the Yan clan? If you really care about Rock Dragon's situation, you should ask, Is your father alive? You asked him so straightforwardly. Do you want to fight Yank God King to the death? Yan Tiangang and the other 4 experts were indescribably shocked as they secretly communicated with each other. How could this be? Who is that kid? How does he know about the Yan clan? What primal chaos continent? What is that place? Could it be that there are other continents besides the one we are on? That kid is too mysterious. He actually knows a god king from another continent. Isn't this too much of a coincidence? If he has a relationship with Yank God King, would they still fight? Can we still take revenge? Yan Tiangang and the others were unsure and hesitant. At this time, Yank God King also woke up from his shock. His eyes were as cold as ice as he stared at Ji Tianxing and coldly shouted, Kid, no matter who you are, you dared to insult my father. If you can't give a reasonable explanation today, this king will definitely tear you to pieces. Hearing this, Ji Tianxing smiled even more meaningfully. Originally, he was only guessing. However, Yank God King's reaction proved that he guessed correctly. Yan Tiangang and the others in the distance were even more shocked and couldn't help but exclaim. Heavens! He actually guessed correctly. Yank God King's father is indeed called Rock Dragon. If that's the case, Tianxing knows Rock Dragon. They are either old acquaintances or enemies. If they are old acquaintances, then we won't be able to take revenge. I hope they are enemies. I still don't understand. Tianxing is just a god monarch. How can he set up a king-grade god array? How would they know the god kings of other continents? Things seem to be developing in a strange direction. Seeing the Yank God King's reaction, Ji Tianxing raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, It looks like your father is already dead? That's right. You introduced yourself as Tianquan Territorial Lord. But I remember that the Tianquan Territorial Lord from 1,000 years ago was your father, Rock Dragon. You must have inherited your father's position after his death, right? Upon hearing this, the Yank God King's face twitched fiercely, his eyes blazing with fury. His voice was almost hoarse as he suppressed his anger and growled, Who the hell are you? Do you dare to tell me your name? Ji Tianxing smiled and said calmly, Tianxing. There are also many people who call me the Killing God. Tianxing? Killing God? The Yank God King was stunned for a moment. He frowned and thought for a long time. He searched through his memories but couldn't remember where there was such a person. After a while he stopped thinking and glared at Ji Tianxing. He asked in a deep voice, Brat, don't try to trick me. Do you dare to tell me your real name? Ji Tianxing raised an eyebrow and said indifferently, This is my real name. If you don't believe me, you can ask those guys. The Yank God King frowned and turned to look at Yan Tiangang and the others in the distance. Ji Tianxing and the 4 experts also heard Ji Tianxing's words. Without waiting for the Yank God King to ask, they took the initiative to confess. Lord God King, he is indeed Tianxing. Yes, the killing god is the nickname given to him by the people of this empire. The Yank God King turned back and continued to glare at Ji Tianxing. He sneered, you want to trick me with this little trick? Do you think I will believe you? Ji Tianxing's expression was still indifferent. He said indifferently, it's up to you to believe it or not. The Yank God King suppressed his anger and asked again, you know so much about the Yan clan and know my father's name. Let me ask you, are you an enemy or a friend of my father? Ji Tianxing thought seriously for a moment and said, of course we are not enemies, but we can't be considered friends either. Your father wants to be friends with me, but he doesn't have the fortune or qualifications. The moment he said this, the air froze. The Yank God King's expression froze. His pupils shrank and his eyes became incomparably cold. In that instant he restrained his aura and released an incomparably dangerous killing intent. The thick sense of humiliation caused his killing intent to soar. Brat, you insulted my father again and again. Do you not know how to write the word, death? The Yank God King's anger reached its peak and he roared in rage. Ji Tianxing said without a change in expression, it's a pity your father is dead. Otherwise he would definitely give you a big slap for being so rude to me. The Yank God King was so angry that smoke came out of his orifices and he almost went berserk on the spot. You arrogant and ignorant bastard, I will crush you into pieces and tear you to pieces. Just you wait. I will break open the door now and kill you with my own hands. The Yank God King's patience had reached its limit. He didn't want to waste any more words with Ji Tianxing. He forcibly suppressed his endless anger and began to cast spells to break the samsara killing formation. He had previously broken through 50% of the formation. However, he had stopped casting spells for so long that the divine power he injected into the formation had long been disrupted and scattered. Now he had to start all over again. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The Yank God King suppressed his anger and poured all of his divine power into the samsara killing formation. With his previous experience, his casting speed was much faster and he was even more confident. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing smiled and said, do your best to break the formation. I will wait for you. At the same time I will recall some things. The Yank God King frowned and asked subconsciously, recall what? Ji Tianxing smiled playfully and said, of course it has to do with your father. What is it? The Yank God King was curious and asked again. Ji Tianxing smiled even more mockingly. Take a guess. You. The Yank God King was furious and glared at him. However, he also knew that Ji Tianxing was deliberately playing with him. Thus, he didn't pursue the matter and continued to cast spells to break the formation. As expected, Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else. He stood calmly at the top of the door and closed his eyes to rest. Judging from his expression and posture, he really did seem to be recalling some things. Time silently passed. The Yank God King focused on breaking the formation. Yan Tiangang and the others could only wait patiently. Unknowingly, another day passed. The Yank God King had already broken through 80% of the samsara killing formation. At this time, Ji Tianxing suddenly opened his eyes and revealed a playful smile. That's right, this king finally remembered something very important. Sword piercing the nine heavens, sword piercing the nine heavens. Chapter 3256. The Yank Divine King was focused on breaking the formation. Suddenly hearing Ji Tianxing's voice, his mind trembled. Out of intense curiosity and thirst for knowledge, he subconsciously asked, what is it? Ji Tianxing looked down at him with a calm expression and said in a low voice, on a certain winter more than 1,000 years ago, a handsome and mighty divine king of the sword appeared in the Tianshan domain. That divine king's Tao of the sword was unparalleled. In 10 years he challenged nearly 100 experts and never lost. At that time, that divine king's reputation was like the sun in the sky, close to that of the Tianshan domain lord. Hearing this, the Yank divine king frowned. His mind was drawn and the casting of his hands slowed down and gradually stopped. Ji Tianxing revealed a look of reminiscence and said slowly, although at that time, you were still being tempered in the eyes of Feng Yentian and did not have the qualifications to deal with family matters. But you should know that the domain lord of the Tianshan domain at that time was your father's cousin. The second strongest expert and genius of the Yan clan, Yan Taixian. Hearing this familiar name, the Yank divine king's body trembled. His pupils constricted and his nerves tensed up. He completely stopped casting and forgot about breaking the formation. He stared at Ji Tianxing and asked in a low voice, "How do you know all this? What are you trying to say?" Ji Tianxing ignored him and said, "As the saying goes, a mountain cannot hold two tigers." That divine king of the sword's fame was enough to shake Yan Taixian's position. Moreover, the emperors of the various empires of the Tianshan domain all had some sort of relationship with that divine king of the sword, or had received some pointers and teachings from him. Yan Taixian felt that his position as domain lord was in danger, so he sent a secret message to your father, asking for his help. He wanted your father to join hands with him to deal with that divine king of the sword. The Yank divine king's eyes became colder and colder. His fists were clenched so tightly that they creaked. 3 cold words came out of his mouth. "Continue." Ji Tianxing continued without a change in expression. Yan Taixian thought of many methods: poisoning, setting traps, assassinating, and scheming. However, your father still had some conscience and advised him not to destroy his own reputation. What your father meant was that he would help Yan Taixian hold the line and have him challenge the God King to a decisive battle at the peak of Heavenly Mountain. Only by winning fair and square could one demonstrate the might of a domain lord. Yan Taixian agreed, but he repeatedly begged your father that no matter who wins or loses, he must eliminate the source of the problem. According to Yan Taixian, he was trying to stabilize the Yan clan's power. Ji Tianxing spoke with fervor and assurance. His tone was calm and composed as if he had experienced it himself. The Yank divine king listened intently, not daring to miss a single word. With a dark expression he said, "Brat, not only did you insult my father, you also slandered my uncle? No matter what, you're dead meat. This king will never let you off." Ji Tianxing ignored his words and continued to narrate. After Yan Taixian issued the challenge, the deity king arrived as scheduled. The two of them fought on the peak of Heavenly Mountain. However, Yan Taixian concealed the news and no one else watched the battle. Only he, the deity king, and your father were there. Yan Taixian and the deity king fought for more than 200 moves and was heavily injured. However, the deity king refused to admit defeat. Thus, the two of them fought for another 300 moves. Yan Taixian's injuries were even worse. His divine body was almost destroyed and he had no choice but to admit defeat. However, although he admitted defeat on the surface, he was secretly harboring evil intentions. He purposely distracted the deity king and made him careless. Meanwhile, your father took the opportunity to ambush the deity king with all his might. At this point, Ji Tianxing looked at the Yank divine king with burning eyes and revealed a mocking sneer. "What do you think the result was?" The Yank divine king's body trembled. His expression was very ugly and he cursed with anger. "You bastard, don't you dare twist the truth. How could this prince's uncle be such a sinister and despicable person? Also, my father is a dignified and righteous example. How could he possibly ambush someone?" Ji Tianxing immediately laughed and shook his head. "It looks like you've been kept in the dark all this time. You don't know the truth at all." The Yank divine king saw that his tone was firm and vivid. He didn't seem to be lying. He couldn't help but ask, "The truth? Then why don't you tell me what the truth is?" Ji Tianxing smiled but didn't say anything. The Yank divine king's expression darkened even more. He sneered, "What? You can't tell me? You made all this up and purposely slandered my father's and uncle's reputations." Before he could finish, Ji Tianxing pointed at the gates of the divine palace and smiled mockingly. "When you break the formation and come before me, I'll tell you." The Yank divine king finally reacted. He was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Just now, he had been listening to Ji Tianxing's story and forgot to use his arts to break the formation. As a result, the divine power he injected into the formation became chaotic and dissipated. All his efforts from the day before had been wasted. He had to start all over again. "Oh, you despicable bastard, I won't forgive you." The Yank divine king roared angrily. He was so angry that his body trembled and his chest rose and fell rapidly. Ji Tianxing said slowly, "Kid, continue breaking the formation. If you want to know what will happen, listen to the next part." The Yank divine king was furious that he had been played. However, there was nothing he could do. He could only suppress his anger and try to remain calm. He used his arts to break the formation again. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Thousands of dazzling divine lights shot out like a rain of arrows and entered the reincarnation-killing formation. The Yank divine king suppressed his anger and endless killing intent. He used all his strength to break the formation. This time he broke the formation even faster. After a mere 20 hours, his progress in breaking the formation had reached 80%. During this time, Ji Tianxing kept his eyes closed and cultivated silently. He did not say a word. However, at this moment he suddenly opened his eyes and sighed emotionally. Say, although your father's nature can be considered upright and has the demeanor of a divine king powerhouse, he was unable to persuade Yan Tai Tai. But he couldn't persuade Yan Taixian, so in a moment of weakness he actually launched a sneak attack on that god king. The sudden voice disturbed the Yank divine king's mind. However, he did not stop casting arts. He sneered disdainfully. Kid, don't even think about disturbing me from breaking the formation. This time, no matter what you say, I will break this formation in one go. He made up his mind to not be affected by Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing continued, unfortunately your father's strength was too weak. Even when that divine king was unprepared, he still failed. Moreover, your father lost very miserably and disgracefully. He was even inferior to Yan Tai Tai. In just 10 moves he was heavily injured by that divine king and vomited blood. He knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. The Yank divine king did not want to listen to him. However, when he heard this, he exploded in anger. He roared without hesitation. Bullshit. You despicable and shameless bastard. How wise and powerful was my father? How could he be defeated in 10 moves? My father has always been unyielding. How could he beg for mercy? Chapter 3257. In the Yank deity king's heart, his father was his idol and role model. Rock Dragon was not only the strongest in the Yen clan, he was also the pride of the entire clan. Not only because of Rock Dragon's talent, but also because of his unyielding character, righteousness and dignity. Even though Rock Dragon had died many years ago, he would not allow anyone to blaspheme him. Thus, when he heard Ji Tianxing's words, he was so angry that he trembled and his blood boiled. Yank deity king was agitated and his mind was in chaos. His killing intent soared to the sky and he stopped casting. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment before realizing, "Oh, I'm sorry, I remembered wrongly." You. Yank deity king almost vomited blood. Ji Tianxing continued, "Your father seemed to have withstood 11 moves before he was injured by the deity king. Since the assassination failed, your father was very straightforward. He immediately withdrew his blade and admitted defeat, even apologizing to the deity king. The deity king saw that he was quite upright and did not make things difficult for him. However, Yan Taixian was unwilling to give up and took the opportunity to use a vicious divine weapon to assassinate the deity king. Fortunately, the deity king was vigilant and blocked the sneak attack in time, averting the danger. Originally, the deity king wanted to kill Yan Taixian on the spot. However, your father pleaded for mercy and apologized on Yan Taixian's behalf. Only then did the deity king spare Yan Taixian's life. However, the deity king chopped off Yan Taixian's hands as punishment. Speaking up to this point, Ji Tianxing revealed a look of bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. He sighed and said, "In the end, your father can be considered upright, but your uncle is a good-for-nothing. After your father took him away, he kept complaining that your father was not willing to use his full strength, causing the assassination to fail. Because of this, your father even quarreled with him and they parted on bad terms." A month later, the deity king announced that he defeated Yan Taixian, causing a commotion in the Tianshan domain. The deity king only said that he and Yan Taixian fought at the peak of Tianshan mountain and did not mention the assassination. Your father was grateful and felt that the deity king showed mercy and respected the deity king even more. However, Yan Taixian felt humiliated and secretly left the Tianshan domain with resentment. Yank deity king listened attentively. Although he was filled with anger and believed that Ji Tianxing was making things up. Ji Tianxing's words were reasonable, as if he had experienced it himself, he had no way to refute. However, Ji Tianxing did not continue after saying this much. Rock God King saw that he had stopped moving and could not help but ask, "What happened after that? Deity King's uncle left the Tianshan domain? He's been missing for so many years because of that?" Clearly, Rock God King didn't know the truth, nor did he know the reason behind Yan Taixian's disappearance. Ever since his father passed away, he had been investigating Yan Taixian's whereabouts. Deity King's case King Qingjin edition. After his father died, Yan Taixian became the strongest person in the clan. Deity King wanted to find King and ask him to help him find the truth and avenge his father. Ji Tianxing looked at Yank Deity King with a smile. He did not say anything and only pointed at the gate of the divine palace. Ugh! Deity King Yank woke up from his daze and realized that he had stopped casting spells to break the formation. He flew into a rage and cursed loudly. You damned beast, you bastard! How can you be so despicable? Just you wait, this prince will definitely not let you succeed this time. Deity King clenched his teeth and swore. After suppressing his anger, he cast spells to break the formation again. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Thousands of rays of divine power fell into the samsara killing formation like raindrops. Deity King focused on breaking the formation and did not say a word. Ji Tianxing also sat cross-legged in the sky, silently adjusting his breathing. In the distant sea of clouds, Yan Tiangang and the others saw what happened and felt that it was unbelievable. Where did that kid come from? He actually knows the family secrets of the Yank God King? I understand. Tianxing is not from the Northern Heaven region. He and the Yank Divine King came from the same region. Unbelievable. The Rock Ku Divine King with such a powerful strength and such a noble status was actually toyed around by him? What is that brat trying to do? Why do you keep provoking Yank's God King? He is clearly a divine monarch, yet he calls himself this king. He even knows the secrets of divine king powerhouses. This is too strange. Yan Tiangang and the others felt that the situation was becoming increasingly strange and complicated. At this moment they no longer had any thoughts of leaving. Even if he was just here to watch the show, he had to persevere. He had to figure out Ji Tianxing's origin and intentions. Very quickly another 16 hours passed. The Yank Divine King's improvement was very obvious. The time he took to complete the task was shortened once more, and his progress in breaking the formation was once again at 80%. Without a doubt, Ji Tianxing opened his eyes again and began to verbally attack. Your talent in the array Dao is not bad. You actually shortened the time again? The Yank Divine King turned a deaf ear. Ji Tianxing was not embarrassed and continued, Yank, do you want to know the whereabouts of Yan Taixian? The Yank Divine King's face was still tense as he continued to break the formation without a word. He made up his mind that no matter what Ji Tianxing said, he would not stop breaking the formation. This time he must break the samsara killing formation and open the Divine Palace's door. Ji Tianxing's tone was solemn as he said word by word. Actually, Yan Taixian is not missing. He is dead. The sudden news was like a bolt from the blue, causing the Yank Divine King to tremble. His mind was disturbed again and he could not help but refute, impossible. He is a 6th-degree Divine King. Who can kill him? Ji Tianxing frowned and asked, your father is also a 6th-degree Divine King. Isn't he dead too? The Yank Divine King's hands trembled and his casting speed slowed down significantly. Many thoughts involuntarily flashed past his mind and he could not help but ask, then tell me, when did uncle die? Where did he die? And who killed him? Ji Tianxing replied without hesitation, ever since Yan Taixian's hands were chopped off and he lost his position as the domain lord, there was no news of him. He was very disappointed in the Yan clan and held a grudge against the Sword Dao Divine King. He vowed to take revenge on him. Because of this, he roamed the chaotic continent in search of opportunities. In order to break through the bloodline shackles of the Yan clan, in order to break through to the upper Divine King level, he did not hesitate to acknowledge the traitor as his father and was willing to be the other race's lackey. 1,000 years ago, because of some unspeakable reasons, the Sword Dao Divine King was surrounded by countless Divine Kings and they fought in outer space. And among the countless Divine Kings there was Yan Taixian. So, Yan Taixian died under the sword of that Divine King and was buried in outer space, turning into ashes. Ji Tianxing's words were concise and to the point, but it hit the nail on the head. The Yank Divine King's eyes widened in anger when he heard this. He was in a daze for a long time as he was unable to accept this result. It was until Ji Tianxing reminded him again that he was enlightened. Kid, don't be in a daze. You have to start all over again. The Yank Divine King seemed to have awoken from a dream as he was instantly ashamed and furious. His mind was disturbed again and all his previous efforts were wasted. Chapter 3258. After being toyed with several times in a row, the Yank Divine King was about to go crazy. Every time he cracked the samsara killing formation, he reached the most critical moment. Ji Tianxing would interrupt him and make him waste all his previous efforts and start over. Even though he tried his best to suppress his curiosity and thirst for knowledge. However, the past that Ji Tianxing told him were all secrets that he didn't know. It also contained the truth that he wanted to find out. After repeating this several times, a few days had passed. The Yank Divine King was still very far from the truth that he wanted. He was about to go crazy. After learning from the painful experience, he understood that Ji Tianxing's intention was to stall for time. Although he still didn't know why Ji Tianxing was stalling for time and what conspiracy he had. However, he had completely made up his mind. No matter how shocking Ji Tianxing's secrets were, he wouldn't listen anymore. Swoosh. He formed a divine seal with both hands and used his energy to cast a spell, sealing his hearing. This way he wouldn't hear anything. Moreover, he also used his energy to seal his divine sense, so he wouldn't hear Ji Tianxing's divine sense voice transmissions. By using these two methods, he could ensure that he wouldn't be disturbed by Ji Tianxing. Unless Ji Tianxing stepped out of the divine palace and attacked him personally. In that case, he wouldn't even need to crack the divine formation and could directly capture Ji Tianxing. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The Yank Divine King cast a spell again. He continuously released divine light into the samsara killing formation and began to crack it. Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else, but the corners of his mouth curled up into a playful smile as he muttered to himself, sealing off his hearing and divine sense voice transmission? Do you think you won't be disturbed like this? After saying that, he closed his eyes and rested, quietly waiting for time to pass. Soon 12 hours had passed. The Yank Divine King was extremely focused, and his speed of cracking the formation increased again. In just half a day, his progress in cracking the samsara killing formation had reached about 90%. It was the critical moment again. If nothing unexpected happened, the Yank Deity King would be able to open the gates in 2 hours. He raised his head to look at Ji Tianxing in case Ji Tianxing launched a sneak attack. Unexpectedly, while God King Yank was distracted, the samsara killing array that had been operating normally suddenly erupted with a world-destroying strength. In just an instant, the power of the samsara killing formation was unleashed to the extreme. It exploded with dazzling six-colored divine light. Boom! Boundless, dazzling divine light rose into the air like a mushroom cloud, engulfing the Yank God King. Boom! Caught off guard, Yank didn't even have time to cast a defensive divine spell before he was sent flying by the six-colored divine light. He flew hundreds of miles away, then smashed heavily into the sea of clouds. The bronze armor he was wearing had been deformed by the impact, and more than 10 cracks had appeared on it. His tall and sturdy body also became hunched as he curled up his waist. His chest even caved in, and divine blood spurted out of his mouth and nose, igniting into divine flames in the air. The defenseless Yank Deity King was injured by the samsara killing array just like that. His divine soul was in disarray and his divine power had decreased greatly. The ones who ended up in an even more miserable state were Yen Tiangang and the others. Even though they were hundreds of miles away from the gates of the divine palace, the destructive six-colored divine light instantly spread to thousands of miles and engulfed them. Yen Tiangang and the others were only at the Divine Lord realm. They were already seriously injured and only had weak divine sparks left. How could they withstand the impact of the six-colored divine light? Kacha-kacha, sounds of shattering could be heard one after another. Under the dazzling divine light, the 5 godheads shattered on the spot. Yen Tiangang and the others died in grievance. Dozens of divine sparks fell from the sky and scattered in the sea of clouds. Of course, the deaths of Yen Tiangang and the others didn't cause any waves. Ji Tianxing had expected this, so he didn't show any emotion. The Yank Deity King was seriously injured, so he was both shocked and angry. He didn't even look. He flew out of the sea of clouds and hurriedly circulated his energy to suppress his injuries. He furiously charged toward the gates of the divine palace. You bastard! Sinister and despicable bastard! You're finished. Completely finished. This king will never let you go and will kill you no matter what. The Yank Deity King was like an injured beast roaring fiercely. Ji Tianxing looked down at him from above and sneered, "Kid, this king has told you so much, do you still not understand? This king is an existence you can't afford to offend. Leave this place as soon as possible, don't seek your own death." The arrogance and contempt in his words were unmistakable. Although the Yank deity king had guessed that Ji Tianxing's background wasn't small, and his identity wasn't ordinary, he was afraid of him. But he was burning with anger and had somewhat lost his mind. He only had one thought in his mind, and that was to charge into the divine palace and tear Ji Tianxing to pieces. Little bastard, you're too arrogant. Do you think you can scare this king just because you've heard some legends? Do you think you're that sword deity king? You've already exposed yourself, do you know that? Based on your attack just now, this king can determine that you only have the strength of a divine lord. Although Ji Tianxing didn't personally attack and only controlled the samsara killing array, there was a difference between a divine lord and a divine lord. However, there was a fundamental difference between a god monarch and a god king. One could tell from the aura of their god power. This was also the reason why Ji Tianxing didn't attack earlier and only used words to interrupt Yank. After all, he didn't want to expose his strength so early. Swoosh. After the Yank deity king finished speaking, he took out the bronze halberd and let it float above his head, shining with a bronze divine light. This was a mid-grade king-level divine artifact, and also Yank deity king's natal divine artifact. Not only did it have super destructive power, but it also had strong defensive power. With the protection of the bronze halberd, Yank deity king was relieved. He spent 100 breaths of time to circulate his energy to suppress his injuries and break the divine array again. This time Ji Tianxing didn't show any mercy. He didn't want to wait until Yank deity king was about to succeed, so he directly controlled the samsara killing array to attack Yank deity king. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The samsara killing array operated at full power, shooting out thousands of six-colored divine lights that contained dozens of nomological powers. They attacked Yank deity king. Yank deity king was indeed not to be underestimated. He was actually doing two things at once. He controlled the bronze halberd and used the defensive sacred tree to block the thousands of divine lights. At the same time, he used array Dao divine powers to break the samsara killing array. Bam, 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 flang, 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 flang. Thousands of divine light blades shot toward Yank deity king like a rain of arrows, but they were all blocked by the bronze halberd, producing dull sounds. Many sharp blades of divine light were shattered, splashing out light fragments that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Yank deity king was temporarily safe, and his spell to break the array wasn't interrupted. This had a great impact on his cracking of the divine array, and his progress would be very slow. But this was undoubtedly the safest way. Not only could he cast a spell to break the samsara killing formation, but he would also not be interrupted or stopped by Ji Tianxing. Yank deity king saw the light of hope. Chapter 3259. Time passed quickly. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. The killing formation of samsara was still in operation. It continued to unleash blades of divine light to bombard God King Rock. The rusty bronze halberd danced in the air, releasing a dark golden divine light that formed a protective barrier. 99% of the divine light blades were blocked by the dark golden barrier and intercepted by the bronze halberd, shattering into pieces. Only an extremely small number of light blades were able to hit the Rock God King, leaving dents on his bronze armor. The Yank divine king's divine power was weakening and his injuries were worsening. He looked to be in a sorry state, but he gritted his teeth and persevered. After 8 days he finally cracked the samsara killing array. Swoosh. The moment he succeeded, the samsara killing array suddenly stopped operating and its power was greatly weakened. A hole the size of a water tank appeared on the half-meter thick 5-colored barrier. Although the hole wasn't big, it would only last for 10 breaths of time before it healed. But this was enough for the Yank divine king. "Ah, you little bastard, let's see how you block this time. You're dead meat." The Yank divine king laughed complacently, ignoring his exhausted body and mind. He waved his hand and pushed open the doors of the divine palace. The 1,000-foot-tall divine palace doors slowly opened. Swoosh. In a flash, the Yank divine king passed through the hole in the array and rushed into the azure jade divine palace. Ji Tianxing, who was standing at the top of the divine palace doors, couldn't help but frown. His eyes were serious. Damn it. This guy is indeed from the Yen clan. His defensive power is so strong. I used the samsara killing array to disturb him for so long but still couldn't injure him. He still managed to rush in. He muttered to himself and turned to look into the depths of the divine palace. He sighed in his heart, Chao Qingyu, you're a third-stage divine king after all. I helped you heal most of your injuries and delayed you for so long. You should be awake by now, right? Without a doubt. Ji Tianxing and Yank God King had been fighting for a long time, deliberately stalling for time, waiting for God King Azure Jade to wake up. After all, he was only a divine lord. Without the help of the Azure Jade Divine King, there was no way he could defeat the Yank Divine King. Little bastard, hand over your life. Ji Tianxing had just suppressed his worry and anxiety when he heard an angry roar. God King Rock, who was in a sorry state and riddled with wounds, furiously charged over and smashed down with his bronze halberd. Shwa! The bronze halberd emitted a dazzling divine light as it exploded with a powerful force that could suppress everything. It smashed down like a heavenly pillar. Ji Tianxing gathered his thoughts. He gripped the sword of burial of heaven tightly in his right hand and slashed out with all his might. Heaven-splitting sword. The mighty divine power burst out from the sword of burial of heaven. It condensed into a giant sword that was hundreds of meters long and slashed toward the bronze halberd. In the next moment, the two collided in the sky with a loud bang, causing a loud explosion that shook the 9 heavens. Kaboom! The earth-shattering explosion reverberated throughout the entire Azure Jade Divine Palace, causing the sky and earth to tremble. The 100-meter-long giant sword was instantly shattered into thousands of pieces, erupting with a destructive shockwave. The bronze halberd was undamaged, but its divine light dimmed a little. It had consumed a lot of divine power. The Yank God King was unscathed. He was knocked back 10 steps before he stabilized himself. As for Ji Tianxing, he was sent flying and tumbled thousands of meters away. Plop! Ji Tianxing landed on the ground thousands of meters away with a dull thud and a cloud of dust. Although he was not injured, his chest was heaving up and down rapidly. His face was pale. Without a doubt, he had no advantage in a head-on confrontation with the Yank God King. He would only be at a disadvantage. Huff! He exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and flew into the sky, charging toward the Yank God King again. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The burial of heaven waved his sword, sending out thousands of lightning sword beams. They carried dozens of nomological powers as they enveloped the Yank God King. The Yank God King urged his divine power to form a divine light shield while brandishing his halberd to block. Bang 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 bang. Most of the lightning sword beams were blocked by the bronze halberd and collapsed on the spot, causing a series of dull thuds. Even if a few sword beams hit him, they were blocked by the divine light shield and could not hurt him. In the blink of an eye, Ji Tianxing's attack was easily neutralized. This filled the Rock God King with confidence. He laughed contemptuously and said, "Ha! You shameless little bastard. You are indeed just a divine sovereign, but you dare to shamelessly call yourself a king. You still dare to spout nonsense in front of this prince? Prepare to die." As he spoke, the Yank God King charged toward Ji Tianxing with a murderous aura. He waved his halberd ferociously and launched a violent attack. The bronze halberd blossomed with a dazzling divine light, releasing a sky full of divine light and countless spear beams. Under the control of the Yank God King, the bronze halberd smashed, slashed, stabbed, and flicked. It displayed a frightening might as it continuously attacked Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing immediately fell into a dangerous situation. His figure was drowned by the divine light and spear beams. At this time he had already made up his mind and changed his strategy. Limited by his cultivation realm, he could not fight the Yank God King head-on. That would be asking for trouble. He could not block the Yank God King's all-out attack, nor could he cause effective injuries to the Yank God King. Facing the aggressive and ferocious Yank God King, he could only dodge and try to contend with him. Big Dipper Sword. Broken Moon. Shattered Sun. Dragon Elephant Divine Fist. Heavenly Dragon Slash. Ji Tianxing's figure flickered in the sky as he constantly teleported and dodged the Yank God King's fierce attacks. At the same time, he used all his strength to use his supreme sword Dao. Sword beams filled the sky as he blocked the Yank God King's attacks. This move was indeed effective. Endless sword beams and spear beams recklessly clashed in the sky, exploding with earth-shattering booms. Millions of fragments of divine light splashed out, bursting with incomparably violent shockwaves. It looked frightening and powerful, as if it wanted to destroy the world. But in reality, the Yank God King's ferocious attacks were all neutralized and dodged by Ji Tianxing. The two fought fiercely, exchanging more than 100 blows. Ji Tianxing did not suffer any substantial injuries. He continued to contend with the Yang God King in this manner, stalling for time without any danger to his life. Even though this required his full concentration, which consumed a great deal of his divine power and tired his mind, he was at his peak. His divine power was abundant, so he could last for a very long time. The Yang God King was aggressive, attacking more than 100 times in a row, but to no avail. He was instantly enraged and bellowed with disdain, "Brat, weren't you arrogant and condescending before? Why do you only know how to dodge now? Do you dare to face this king head-on?" Ji Tianxing turned a deaf ear and did not get angry. He continued to contend with him. The Yank God King sneered again. "Do you think you can stall this king and stall for time like this? Too naive. This king will now let you experience the Yank clan's supreme inheritance." Chapter 3260. It was obvious that the Yank divine king hadn't used all his strength. He could tell that Ji Tianxing was a divine lord, so he was full of contempt and disdain. But Ji Tianxing was very cunning. He kept moving around and fighting with him. He didn't face him head-on at all. In his anger, the Yank divine king unleashed all his strength and used the Yen family's ultimate divine power. Stars fall. The Yank divine king roared. His body emitted a dazzling golden light and an earth-shattering power. He opened his arms and waved them rapidly, using his ultimate divine power. In an instant, thousands of golden stars appeared in the sky with him as the center. Swish, 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 swish. More than 6,000 golden stars fell like meteors. They carried the power to destroy everything as they rained down on Ji Tianxing. At this moment, the world within 5,000 miles was enveloped by golden light. It became dazzling as divine power surged. His ultimate divine power was similar to Ji Tianxing's Sky Destroyer sword array. But in terms of profundity and changes, it was far inferior to the Sky Destroyer sword array. Even so, thousands of dazzling golden stars were enough to blast Ji Tianxing to smithereens at the same time. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing didn't panic. Seeing the Yank divine king use stars fall and see the trajectory of the golden stars in the sky, he wasn't worried. Instead, he smiled playfully. "Stars fall? After 1,000 years, I've seen this ultimate divine power again." Without a doubt, he had seen the power of this divine power when he fought with Yen Taixian and Rock Dragon 1,000 years ago. Moreover, the starry sky fall that Yen Taixian and Rock Dragon executed was even more imposing and vigorous, and its power was even more terrifying and shocking. But at that time he easily dispelled it, which made Yen Taixian and Rock Dragon extremely shocked. Even though he wasn't a divine king today, he could not easily break Starfall Sky with his superb sword Dao like he did in the past. However, his understanding of Starry Sky Meteor far exceeded Rock God King's expectations. "Brat, you only learned some superficial knowledge of this vast star's heavenly fall. You don't even have 30% of your father's mastery. Truly a good-for-nothing." Ji Tianxing didn't dodge. Instead, he stood in the middle of the golden light and the stars. His face was full of disdain. As he spoke, he used the limitless sky of turbidity secret technique, and his figure became transparent and blurry. Swish, swish. Hundreds of thousands of golden stars as big as palaces bombarded him as fast as lightning. However, they all passed through him without any resistance. Boom, 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 boom. One golden star after another crashed into the ground with deafening booms. The entire Green Jade Palace was trembling violently. Huge craters appeared on the ground one after another, and countless ravines split open. Dust that covered the sky burst out. Countless stars dissipated, returning to the earth. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was still standing in the sky. His expression did not change, and he was safe and sound. Seeing this scene, Yang's divine king was dumbfounded. He was so shocked that his jaw dropped. "How could you?" His eyes widened in anger and disbelief. He couldn't help but exclaim. Ji Tianxing looked at him with a smile and said, "Back then your father and that sword Dao divine king fought at the peak of Heavenly Mountain. How dazzling was that? Similarly, with this vast star's heavenly fall, your father could cause 9,000 stars in outer space to crash down like a meteor shower. When the 9,000 stars were condensed to the extreme, they were all under his control and could instantly form an array. A true vast star's heavenly fall is far from just one round of bombardment. Can also borrow the power of array Dao to circulate and attack. It also contains more than 100 types of nomological powers. That is a true vast star's heavenly fall. It's enough to make all mid-level divine kings tremble in fear. However, this vast star's heavenly fall that you used dissipated all 3,000 stars with just one round of bombardment. It's really empty in appearance. It's extremely disappointing. If your father was still alive and saw how useless you are, he would probably be angered to death. Ji Tianxing spoke frankly with assurance, explaining the essence and profundities of vast star's heavenly fall. It was as if an elder was teaching a junior. Yang's divine king was alarmed and furious. He couldn't help but roar. Bastard! Who do you think you are? What qualifications do you have to lecture this king? My father and that sword Dao divine king's great battle. None of the experts in the world saw it with their own eyes. How could you possibly know? You must be making up nonsense to deliberately disturb this king's mind. Yang's divine king roared as he waved his bronze halberd, attacking Ji Tianxing with all his might. Ji Tianxing maintained his transparent state. His figure flickered in the sky as if he was completely unaffected. He easily dodged all the attacks. As he blocked and dodged Yang's attacks, he sneered and said, "Brat, you know that this king's words are all true, but you want to go against your conscience and deny it? It seems that you've admired your father since you were a child. You took him as your role model and aspired to become an expert like him, right? Do you think that you can inherit your father's mantle just because you've inherited the position of Tianquan Domain Lord and are still working hard on your cultivation? You think too highly of yourself. This is an insult to your father." Indeed, Yang's divine king had admired his father Rock Dragon since he was a child. He took him as his role model and goal and aspired to become an expert like his father. In fact, he might even surpass his father and be even stronger than him. Unfortunately, Rock Dragon had fallen more than 900 years ago. He inherited the position of Tianquan Domain Lord and became the strongest expert of the Yan clan, but he couldn't do it alone. Today, the Yan clan's talents had withered and their power and prestige had plummeted. This was a great blow to Yang's divine king. He had been trying to strengthen the clan, but to little avail. Now Ji Tianxing had exposed the truth in front of him and mercilessly attacked him. These words hurt him greatly. His confidence and dignity had been trampled. How could he not be furious? Shut up. Stop talking. What right do you have to judge me? What right do you have to talk about my father? You're just a weak divine lord and ant-like existence. Yang's divine king was like an injured and furious lion. As he roared, he pounced on Ji Tianxing even more fiercely. Ji Tianxing's infinite sky of turbidity was also greatly suppressed and couldn't be maintained for too long. He had to teleport away to avoid Yang's attack and continue to attack him verbally. Kid, this king was only speaking the truth. Did this poke at the pain in your heart and hurt your dignity? You're the one who's useless. You're not proficient in the Yan clan's ultimate techniques, yet you still want to deceive yourself and others? You say I'm weak and ant-like. What about you? You can't even do anything to me. All you can do is roar like crazy. How weak are you? Ji Tianxing's words could be said to strike at the heart. Every word was like a sharp sword that accurately pierced Yang's heart, stabbing the most sensitive and fragile part of his heart. This made him lose control of his emotions even more. He couldn't keep his mind clear and his divine power became chaotic. Who are you? Other than that damn divine king of the sword, who else knows about this? Chapter 3261. The Yang divine king couldn't figure it out. He knew that Ji Tianxing was telling the truth. But other than his father Rock Dragon, his uncle Rock Xian, and that divine king of the sword, there shouldn't be a fourth person who knew these secrets. There was a moment when he suspected that Ji Tianxing was that divine king of the sword. But this thought disappeared in a flash and never appeared again. After all, this was too absurd and laughable. That divine king of the sword was able to easily defeat Rock Dragon and Rock Xian. He was at least a 7th stage divine king. 1,000 years had passed. Even if that divine king of the sword hadn't increased in strength, he couldn't have regressed to the divine monarch realm. Therefore, the Yang divine king couldn't figure it out. His heart was filled with confusion and anger. However, Ji Tianxing refused to tell him the truth no matter what. He wanted to disturb his mind and force him to go crazy. The Yang divine king saw through Ji Tianxing's intentions. He gradually suppressed his anger and calmed down. Little bastard, I don't care if you're telling the truth or not. I've already seen through your scheme. You want to disturb my mind and stall for time until reinforcements arrive. Stop dreaming. I'm going to kill you and refine your soul and memories. I'm going to find the answer myself. As a divine king, the Yang divine king naturally had the ability to seize the memories of the soul. He made up his mind. He didn't want to waste any more words with Ji Tianxing. He attacked with all his might. Sweep the 9 provinces. Desperate gambit. The Yang divine king brandished his bronze halberd and unleashed all his strength. He used all sorts of divine abilities and ultimate techniques. Ji Tianxing was always in a transparent state. His figure was blurry. Hundreds of divine abilities and ultimate techniques came at him. He tried his best to dodge them all. If he couldn't dodge them, even if he was hit, he wouldn't be injured. Even so, the Yang divine king didn't give up. He continued his fierce attacks. Because he firmly believed that no matter what divine ability Ji Tianxing used, no matter how strange it was, it had to be supported by divine power. This kind of divine ability couldn't be maintained forever. There would definitely be a time when its power would be exhausted. His ferocious attacks would increase the consumption of Ji Tianxing's divine power, causing him to end his transparent state as soon as possible. If not, Ji Tianxing was already in an invincible position. Why would he need to dodge his attack? In fact, Yang's deduction was correct. Ji Tianxing's limitless sky of turbidity could not be maintained forever. The more profound his skills were, the longer he could remain in this transparent state. The stronger the attack, the shorter the duration. Under the ferocious attacks of the Yang divine king, he only lasted for 2 hours before he could no longer continue. His figure returned to normal. Ji Tianxing's boundless turbidity had disappeared, and he could not use it again for a short period of time. This made Ji Tianxing's situation even more dangerous. The Yang divine king threw his head back and laughed heartily. "Ha! You dare to play tricks in front of me? This prince has long seen through your facade. He couldn't use that kind of divine ability anymore, right? You're going to be finished soon." As he laughed heartily, he waved his halberd energetically and launched a fierce attack on Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing could not face him head-on, so he could only use teleportation to evade and use his sword Dao divine ability to contend with him. The two figures flashed through the sky continuously, creating a dazzling sight to behold. Both sides used all kinds of divine abilities, releasing dazzling divine technique projections. Brilliant light filled the sky as they collided, creating loud booms that resounded through the clouds. The battle affected an area of 8,000 kilometers, causing the surrounding mountains, forests, and lakes to be reduced to rubble. As time passed, Ji Tianxing's situation became more and more dangerous. Not only was his divine power rapidly depleting, but his strength was also becoming weaker and weaker. His injuries were also becoming more and more serious. His long hair was disheveled and stained with blood. His white robe had been torn into many strips that fluttered in the wind. Even his body was covered with crisscrossing wounds, from which golden divine blood continuously flowed out. However, he gritted his teeth and endured his injuries, using his powerful recovery abilities to slowly heal his wounds. As for his divine power, when he overused it, he used the heaven-mending pearl and the 5 elements world to replenish it. It was because of this that he could stubbornly hold on. Of course, there was another very important reason, and that was that Yang divine king was also injured. From the moment he attacked to break the formation until now, he had basically not rested, and his divine power had long been depleted by 30 to 40%. In addition, he was previously riddled with injuries from the samsara killing formation, and had not had the time to treat his injuries. After fighting Ji Tianxing for so long, his strength was also constantly weakening. It was just that compared to Ji Tianxing, his situation was slightly better. If one of them had to fall, the first person to fall would definitely not be him. Half a day and a half, time passed, and unknowingly 2 days had already passed. After 2 days of fighting, Ji Tianxing and Yang divine king were both exhausted, and their attacks had clearly slowed down. The current Ji Tianxing was already a bloody mess all over, his injuries too horrible to look at. Yang divine king's injuries did not worsen, but his power consumption was too great, only left with 40% of his strength. Of course, when he continued to attack ferociously, Ji Tianxing could only be chased all over the sky, hiding everywhere. At this time he already had victory in his hands. Defeating and capturing Ji Tianxing was only a matter of time. However, after experiencing 2 days of fighting, Yang divine king completely put away his contempt. He also had some more fear and admiration towards Ji Tianxing. In his mind, many thoughts kept popping up uncontrollably. Too inconceivable. What kind of monster is this boy? How can he be monstrous to such an extent? This king is a 4th-degree realm middle-level divine king, and he's just a peak divine lord. Under normal circumstances, an ant-like existence like him would be easily insta-killed by this king. He actually delayed for such a long time, and this king was unable to kill him. If this were to spread out, it would definitely shock the world and make countless experts' jaws drop. It's really hard to imagine if he broke through to the divine king realm. How terrifying would it be? I reckon that he who is at the first level of the divine king realm can fight to a draw with this king, and even have hopes of defeating this king. The more Yang divine king thought, the more alarmed he became. His attitude towards Ji Tianqing also changed imperceptibly, with some more reverence. Of course, his curiosity towards Ji Tianqing also became stronger and stronger. He made up his mind, no matter what, he had to refine Ji Tianqing's divine soul memories and solve all the doubts in his heart. Just like this, another day passed. The two fought for an entire 3 days, and it was finally about to end. This evening, when the sun was about to set in the sea of clouds, Ji Tianqing's strength was about to be exhausted, and his movements were sluggish. It was difficult for him to resist Yang Divine King's attacks. At the critical juncture, he gritted his teeth and made a decision, using the power of the 5 elements world. Sword of Annihilation. He used twice the power of the world, condensing it into a huge divine sword that was tens of thousands of feet long, and slashed at Yang Divine King with all his might. Chapter 3262. Now that Ji Tianqing was even stronger, the power of the world that he could use was more than 10 times stronger than before. Naturally, the sword of annihilation he unleashed was truly capable of destroying the heavens and earth. Its might was terrifying to the extreme. This completely unfamiliar power shocked Yang Divine King. What was even more unbelievable was that there was an invisible suppressive force that restricted his movements, making it difficult for him to move. Facing the giant sword that was tens of thousands of feet long, he could not dodge at all. He could only use all his strength to block it. Ask the heavens with the horizontal spear. Yang Divine King roared. He held the bronze halberd with both hands and raised it above his head, bursting with all his strength. Buzz. Endless divine power poured into the bronze halberd, erupting with a dazzling golden divine light. In the next instant, an even more dazzling sword of annihilation engulfed Yang Divine King and ruthlessly struck him. Kaboom! A deafening explosion erupted between heaven and earth, resounding throughout the entire Green Jade Palace, causing the ground to tremble for tens of thousands of miles. Amidst the endless golden light, the bronze halberd was sent flying, tumbling hundreds of miles away and stabbing into the ground. Yang Divine King was also sent flying. His thick and sturdy arms were torn apart, spurting blood. Even his mouth and nose were spurting out arrows of blood, and his face was ashen. What was even more tragic was that the light of the world enveloped his entire body, bringing with it an unparalleled corrosive power. The bronze armor he was wearing was already filled with dents and cracks. Under the baptism of the light of the world, the bronze armor collapsed on the spot, turning into endless fine sand and dust like a weathered rock. Without the protection of the bronze armor, Yang Divine King's body of flesh and blood was also shaved off by the light of the world. He was no longer as muscular and burly as before, becoming much thinner. Of course, the price was that he was bleeding all over and roaring in pain. "Oh, you bastard, you bastard. I will definitely grind your bones to dust, definitely." After suffering such heavy injuries, Yang Divine King's strength fell sharply. He flew hundreds of miles before falling into the ruins. A deep pit was smashed into the ground, sending smoke and dust into the air. Countless cracks appeared around it. However, he was so furious that his eyes turned red. Ignoring his injuries, he leaped out of the deep pit and flew into the sky again. Facing the dissipating golden light, he who was covered in blood was like a crazed beast, recklessly charging towards Ji Tianqing. "Die, you bastard!" As he roared, he contacted the bronze halberd with his mind. The bronze halberd immediately flew out from the ground and landed in his hand. He rushed in front of Ji Tianqing, holding the bronze halberd with both hands, and swept it out regardless of everything. A heaven-suppressing divine might enveloped Ji Tianqing, preventing him from moving or dodging. With no other choice, Ji Tianqing could only hold the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and resist with all his might. Clang! The bronze halberd smashed into the sword of burial of heaven with a deafening bang. Ji Tianqing was sent flying on the spot, and the sword of burial of heaven almost slipped out of his hand. The impact was too strong, causing his hands to break and his arms to droop weakly. Moreover, his internal organs had also suffered a violent impact and were in a state of shattering and displacement. While he was still flying, large amounts of blood foam came out of his mouth, and his face was as pale as paper. Plop. After flying for dozens of miles, he fell from the sky and crashed into the ground. Dust flew everywhere and cracks appeared in the ground. Ji Tianxing endured his injuries and pain and hurriedly flew out of the deep pit. However, just as he appeared in the sky, the crazed Yank Divine King pounced on him again. With a wave of the bronze halberd, thousands of dazzling spear shadows shot out and enveloped Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing could only use his divine power to form a defensive shield and use his mind to control the sword to block the spear shadows that filled the sky. Bang bang bang. With a series of muffled sounds, Ji Tianxing was sent flying again. This time his injuries were even worse. Blood came out of his mouth and nose and he fell 30 miles away. The white robe that he wore had long turned gold, and it was completely soaked in divine blood. His injuries were too severe and his divine power was almost depleted. He was panting heavily. Plop. Once again he fell to the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. The pain in his divine body did not affect his mind. He was disappointed and helpless and he sighed silently. Sigh. There is a huge gap between a Sir God and a divine king. They are in two completely different realms. Even I can't cross the gap and defeat a 4th-degree divine king with the power of a peak Sir God. How good would it be if I recovered to the divine king realm? Even if I was in the first level of the divine king realm, I could have defeated Yank. I wouldn't have ended up in such a state. When he thought of this, he turned his head and looked in the direction of the stone house in the depths of the divine palace. Chao Qingyu, I haven't seen you in 1,000 years. Haven't you made any progress? I've delayed for so long but you still haven't woken up. How disappointing. At this moment, Yank approached with the bronze halberd in his hand, his face full of malice. Kikik. Little bastard, why don't you keep running? Keep hiding? I've already said that you are no match for me. You will die today. Accept your fate. Your time has come. By the time he finished speaking, Rock had already arrived above Ji Tianxing's head. He held the bronze halberd with both hands and raised it high. He gathered his strength and prepared to stab down. Ji Tianxing knew that he had nowhere to run. In the next moment the bronze halberd would come crashing down and he would die on the spot. Not only would he be killed by Yank but his memories would also be refined. Now that things have come to this, I can only use the Jutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda to save my life. Ji Tianxing thought to himself and was about to summon the pagoda. But at this moment something unexpected happened. In the depths of the Green Jade Palace, a dazzling rainbow divine light suddenly lit up and shot into the sky. Whoosh. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The dazzling rainbow divine light illuminated the entire palace and covered thousands of kilometers of the sky. The divine light surged rapidly, forming a sky full of wind, fire and lightning. Purple, gold and red lightning flashed. Moreover, the divine light released terrifying divine power fluctuations. The aura was extremely sacred and vast. This sudden scene stunned both Ji Tianxing and Yank. The two of them looked toward the depths of the palace in unison, their eyes filled with shock and astonishment. After 2 breaths of silence, the two of them saw the divine light clearly and felt the sacred aura. They both exclaimed at the same time. Light of a divine king? That's the energy fluctuations of a divine king. What's going on? Did a divine king make a breakthrough? Is it that bastard Chao Qingyu? After exclaiming, Ji Tianxing suddenly thought of a possibility. His eyes lit up as hope returned. God King Rock furrowed his brow, his expression turning somewhat ugly. Chapter 3263. Damn it! Did that bastard Chao Qingyu not only recover from his injuries, but break through to the next realm? He's in the 3rd layer of the King God realm. Once he breaks through, won't he be in the 4th layer of the King God realm the same as me? Divine King Yank's expression was gloomy as he thought to himself. Looking at his miserable injuries, if Chao Qingyu really broke through, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, 2 breaths later Divine King Yank realized something else. Why does that Divine King's light have a special pattern of wind, fire and lightning? Why is that divine power aura so familiar? Divine King Yank looked at the depths of the divine palace with a sharp gaze. He was full of doubts as he carefully observed and sensed. The more he observed, the more his brows furrowed and his expression became strange. After a while he suddenly thought of something and his expression changed dramatically. Ah! It's the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir. My Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir. Clearly, Divine King Yank had sensed the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir's aura from the scene of wind, fire and lightning. He was so angry that he went crazy and his heart was burning with worry. He even ignored Ji Tianxing, who was not far away, and rushed into the depths of the divine palace. Because he guessed that someone had taken or was refining the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir. It was a divine item that he had spent a lot of effort to obtain after paying a huge price. It was more important than his life. He could spare Ji Tianxing for now, but he could not allow anything to happen to the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir. Whoosh! Divine King Yank, who was in a frenzy, streaked across the sky like a bolt of lightning and rushed into the depths of the divine palace. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing hurriedly took out 2 divine elixirs and swallowed them, using the power of the heaven-mending orb to suppress his injuries. He quickly circulated his energy to refine the elixirs. His body was covered in a layer of sacred white light, and his injuries were quickly healing. In the blink of an eye, Divine King Yank rushed into the depths of the divine palace. He saw with his own eyes at the edge of the space not far ahead, there was a towering mountain 10,000 meters tall. At the peak of the mountain there were a few simple stone houses. The Divine King's light that soared into the sky came from the stone house. Previously, when he and Ji Tianxing were engaged in a fierce battle, the aftermath of the battle had spread to a radius of 8,000 li. However, this mountain peak was located at the edge of the mountain range. Fortunately, it had survived and was not destroyed. Of course, it was also because Ji Tianxing had deliberately avoided it. He knew that Chao Qingyu and Laner were in the stone house, so he tried his best to avoid them during the battle so as not to endanger their safety. It really is the aura of the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Pill. Whoever dares to touch this king's divine pill will die. The Yank God King was agitated and irritable. His eyes were red as he roared and charged towards the stone house as fast as lightning. He flew above the mountain peak and was very close to the stone house. Right at this moment, a green figure flew out of the stone house, releasing 9 rainbow-colored pillars of light that blasted toward the Yank God King. Yank reflexively raised his bronze halberd to block in front of him. Boom! Amidst a deafening explosion, the Yank God King was sent flying for 100 li. Blood rained down from his body, and he was even weaker now. As for the 9 dazzling 7-colored light pillars, they were also shattered into pieces and scattered all over the sky. When the radiance faded, the sky was clear again. It was only now that one could see 2 figures in the sky, facing each other from 100,000 feet away. On one side was the 100 feet tall Yank God King, who was badly mutilated and in a wretched state. On the other side was a great Yen divine tribe woman who was more than 10 feet tall and had a frail body. The woman looked to be in her 30s. She wore a long light green dress and clothes. Her face was dignified and beautiful, and there was a pair of fiery red wings on her back. She was elegant and refined, and she had a refreshing aura like an orchid in an empty valley. Most importantly, she was in the first level of the Divine King realm. She had just broken through to the Divine King realm not long ago, and the vast divine power in her body had yet to calm down. It was still flowing. If she released her aura, it would be easier for her to be detected. The Yank God King glared at her with bloodshot eyes. He roared furiously, "Who are you, bitch? Give me back my divine pill." The green-clad woman was not angry. Her expression was as calm as water and her eyes were cold. She asked indifferently, "You're the Yank God King? You're the one who chased Chao Qingyu from other continents to this place?" The Rockbreaker Divine King grinned sinisterly and shouted coldly with a sinister tone, "Chao Qingyu, that bastard, stole this king's divine pill. Even death cannot wipe out his crimes. Judging by your appearance, you must be Chao Qingyu's friend or family member. Chao Qingyu was a coward, but he hid the divine pill on you. What a joke. Bitch, I won't waste my breath on you. Hand over the divine pill and I'll grant you a dignified death." The green-clad woman was still not angry. She frowned and said indifferently, "I don't want to know where the divine pill came from. I only know that the divine pill was exchanged with Qingyu's life. It's the most precious thing in the world. You want me to hand it over? Dream on. The Yank God King was so angry that he laughed and cursed. Good. Very good. As expected of Chao Qingyu's family member. You're just as despicable and shameless as I am. Since you won't give up until you see the coffin, I'll let you die a quick death. As soon as he finished speaking, the Yank God King held his bronze halberd with both hands and shot out hundreds of sky splitters towards the green-clad woman. The stone house was 100 miles behind the green-clad woman. She did not want the battle to affect Chao Qingyu in the stone house, so she temporarily avoided the attack and fled into the distance. Boom, boom, boom. The sky full of spear shadows missed and bombarded the ground, creating a deafening explosion and sending smoke and dust into the air. A 500-mile crater appeared on the ground, and the violent impact caused the mountain to shake violently more than 10 times. Fortunately, the mountain did not collapse and the stone house on the mountain peak was also intact. The Yank God King guessed that Chao Qingyu might be in the stone house, but he had no time to worry about it. He was 100% sure that the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir was on the green-clad woman. Furthermore, the green-clad woman's entire body exuded the aura of a divine pill. She was a walking Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir. No matter what, he had to get the divine pill back first and then deal with other matters later. Bitch. Don't even think about escaping. Give me your life. The Yank God King roared when he saw the green-clad woman fleeing in the direction of the palace gate. He held his bronze halberd and chased after her. The green-clad woman covered 1,000 miles in a single step. In the blink of an eye, she flew 8,000 miles before stopping. Just as she was about to use her divine ability, she saw Ji Tianxing healing himself on the ground not far away. Seeing Ji Tianxing covered in wounds, blood, and a miserable appearance, her heart trembled. Deep gratitude and guilt welled up in her heart. Mr. Tianxing, we will remember your kindness in our hearts. Quickly retreat and heal yourself. I will stop this bastard. The green-clad woman shouted at Ji Tianxing. Then she turned to face the Yank God King and began to fight. Ji Tianxing, who was healing himself, opened his eyes and stared at the green-clad woman. He sighed to himself, just as I expected. That divine pill not only healed her injuries, but also allowed her to break through to the God King realm. Sword piercing the 9 heavens, sword piercing the 9 heavens. Chapter 3264. Without a doubt. The girl in green was none other than Lan. More than a month ago she had consumed the elixir that Chao Qingyu had brought back. After refining and absorbing the elixir, not only had she recovered from her injuries, but she had also returned to her original form from a ferocious beast. She had also used the elixir to break through to the first level of the Divine King realm. After all, she had been a peak Divine Lord back then. Even if she had been sealed and imprisoned in the darkness for 10,000 years, her strength would continue to rise until she reached the limit of the Divine Lord realm. What she lacked was an opportunity, a huge opportunity. The Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir that Chao Qingyu had risked his life to bring back was the opportunity she needed. Therefore it was only natural that she had broken through to the Divine King realm. Hearing Lan's cry, Ji Tianxing retreated 300 miles to quickly suppress his injuries and recover his divine power. At this time Lan had already started fighting with Yank. Bam! Rumble! The two of them used all kinds of divine skills as they fought in the sky. Divine skills collided with each other, creating deafening explosions. The two of them kept flashing and moving as fast as lightning, leaving a series of afterimages in the sky. In a short period of time the two of them were evenly matched. Neither of them had the upper hand. Although Yank was 3 levels higher than Lan, he had suffered heavy injuries. Moreover, he had been continuously using techniques and fighting for more than half a month. His divine power had long been depleted. At this time he was mentally exhausted and his divine power was empty. He only had about 30% of his strength left. As for Lan, although she was in the first level of the Divine King realm, she had just broken through and was at the peak of her strength. She had refined the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir, but she had not completely absorbed the elixir. It was still exploding in her body. Therefore she was full of energy and vigor as if she had an endless supply of divine power. She was at a disadvantage because she lacked battle experience and did not know any Divine King level divine skills. Otherwise she could have gained the upper hand and suppressed Yank. Unknowingly, 10 hours had passed. After all, the number of divine skills that Lan Er knew was limited. As she continued to fight, she repeatedly used those divine abilities. Coupled with the fact that she'd exhausted too much divine energy, her imposing aura had obviously weakened greatly, and she wasn't as ferocious and domineering as before. On the other hand, Yang's God King remained the same. His strength was profound and his combat experience was rich. It could be said that he was fighting steadily and without any danger. After exhausting Lan Er's aura and figuring out her attacking methods and ultimate skills, Yang God King had nothing to worry about. He used the least amount of divine power to cast the most effective divine ability to block and neutralize Lan Er's attack. Gradually he began to gain the upper hand. He took the initiative and suppressed Lan. Lan Er was forced to retreat step by step. It was difficult for her to counterattack effectively. She could only think of ways to block and neutralize the attacks. Moreover, she was worried that the aftermath of the battle would destroy the mountain and hurt Chao Qingyu in the stone house. With this concern, her movements were even more restricted when she dodged, making it difficult for her to display her full strength. As time passed, 16 hours passed. At this time, Yang God King was still the same. His strength hadn't decreased significantly and he wasn't injured at all. However, Lan Er's aura had weakened. After exhausting her divine energy, her fighting strength had greatly decreased. Not only was she completely suppressed by Yang God King, but she was also forced to retreat step by step. There were also many wounds all over her body. Her internal organs were injured and displaced. Blood spurted from her mouth and nose. Her limbs and back were split open and there were also bloody holes. Scarlet blood gushed out, drenching her clothes and hair. She was in a sorry state. Even though her injuries were worsening and she was constantly suffering from pain, she still clenched her teeth and didn't let out a single cry. Relying on her strong willpower, she stubbornly held on and blocked Yang God King's wave after wave of attacks. However, this couldn't change the outcome, nor could it reduce the difference in strength between the two. Another 2 hours passed. Her injuries were even worse. Her entire body was dyed red with blood. Even the scarlet wings on her back had been torn apart and were dripping with blood. Now that she was heavily injured and extremely weak, it was difficult for her to hold on. Not only was she being forced to retreat step by step, her injuries were worsening. Her life was in danger at any time. Boom! Another dull sound exploded. Lan Er was sent flying by a fist as large as a mountain. Blood spurted out of her orifices. Plop! She fell from the sky and smashed into the ground, creating a deep crater and sending dust into the air. Her internal organs were damaged to varying degrees. Her meridians and bones were broken in many places. Her divine energy was fluctuating and fluctuating. Despite being heavily injured, Lan Er didn't faint. She struggled to crawl out of the crater. At this time, Yang God King flew over and looked down at her from above. After 20 hours of fighting, Yang God King had awoken from his rage and regained his composure. He stared coldly at Lan Er and asked coldly, "Lowly slave, you've already consumed that divine pill and refined it?" Clearly, Yang God King had discovered the truth. After all, Lan Er's entire body exuded the aura of the Wind Lightning Soul Cleansing Pill. She was like a divine pill. Lan Er stubbornly raised her head and glared at him with hatred. She sneered, "So what if I am? Even if I die, I won't let you have that divine pill." Yang God King frowned. Killing intent flashed in his eyes. He sneered, "Lowly slave, you're really despicable. However, after you refine the divine pill, the medicinal power of the Wind Lightning Soul Cleansing Pill has completely merged with your body. You're now like that divine pill. I'll kill you and refine you to take back the divine pill. Although the divine pill's medicinal power and efficacy will decrease, it will still play a key role." As he spoke, God King Rock gripped his halberd and thrust it at Lan. His powerful aura suppressed and locked onto Lan Er, making it impossible for her to dodge. She was about to be pierced by the halberd and her godhead shattered. At this critical moment, a dazzling giant sword over 10,000 feet long swept toward him from the side. An extremely dangerous aura caused Yang God King's expression to change. A chill ran down his spine. In the next moment, before God King Rock could dodge, the giant sword struck the bronze halberd, and an earth-shaking explosion erupted. The bronze halberd was sent flying and tumbled to the ground 50 kilometers away. Yang God King was also forced back. His face was as pale as a sheet of gold. The wounds all over his body reopened and blood gushed out. Whoosh! A golden figure teleported in front of the Rock God King and attacked again with his sword. Rock God King took a closer look and saw that the newcomer was Ji Tianxing. Chapter 3265. For the past 20 hours Lon had been delaying Yank Divine King. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to summon the Jutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and entered the distorted spacetime to heal. 20 hours in the outside world meant 40 days in the distorted spacetime. In those 40 days he had used up a large amount of divine pills, divine stones and origin stones. He had also absorbed the power of the blood flame sacred tree. Now he had recovered 80% of his injuries and his combat strength had returned to its peak. He became spirited and charged out again, attacking the Rock Deity King in an aggressive manner. "Little bastard, you were clearly injured before. How did you recover so quickly?" Yank Divine King asked incredulously, sizing up Ji Tianxing as he panted. Ji Tianxing sneered. "Do you think you can imagine my methods and abilities? Stop resisting stubbornly. The outcome has already been decided. Just surrender." The Rock God King laughed from extreme anger. He said with a voice full of contempt, "You? How dare you ask me to surrender? What a shameless boast. Let's give it a try then." Ji Tianxing shouted coldly as he brandished the Heaven Barrier sword to attack. Sun Shatter. God Slayer. Sword shatters 9 heavens. Ji Tianxing used all his strength and used all kinds of sword techniques, exploding with unparalleled power. As expected, Rock God King was no match for him. All he could do was evade the attacks and retreat. After 10 moves he began to get injured. His injuries worsened and his strength weakened further. However, Yank Divine King was from the Yen clan. His clan's innate ability was strong defense. Even if Ji Tianxing knew Yanxu's divine powers and could easily counter Rock Deity King's counterattack, he still couldn't do anything. However, it was difficult for him to deal fatal damage to Yank Divine King. Yank Divine King also learned about Ji Tianxing's real fighting capacity. Although he was a peak emperor god, he was stronger than Loner, who was in the first sky of the king god realm. He also knew that with his current condition, it was almost impossible for him to kill Ji Tianxing. Thus, while blocking Ji Tianxing's attacks, he consumed a divine pill to absorb the heaven and earth's godly energy to heal his injuries and recover his godly energy. The battle between the two was not as intense as before. Most of the time Yank was dodging, trying his best to conserve his divine power. Just like how Ji Tianxing had fought with him before, they had been moving around and fighting, rarely clashing head-on. Under such circumstances Ji Tianxing could do nothing about it. After much consideration he used the heaven-destroying sword formation to deal with the Yank Divine King. Swish, swish. More than 20,000 huge divine swords appeared in the sky, pouring down like a rainstorm, covering an area of 3,000 miles. Sword radiances danced in the air and quickly formed a sword formation, releasing a power that could suppress heaven and earth. Trapped in the sword formation, Yank Divine King's movements slowed down, and his situation became even more dangerous. Not only did he have to block Ji Tianxing's fierce attacks, but he also had to block and neutralize the tens of thousands of swords. Lon was not in the sword formation as she had already retreated far away. She flew back to the stone house on the mountain peak, consumed a divine pill and sat cross-legged to heal her injuries. Although Tianxing is strong, he is no match for the Yank Divine King. I'm afraid he won't be able to hold on for more than a few days before he is seriously injured again. I have to recover as soon as possible so that I can fight alongside him. Only then can we defeat the Yank Divine King. Lon thought to herself as she circulated her energy to heal her injuries. It's a pity that our cultivation levels are too low. If Qingyu can wake up, the two of us together with Tianxing should be able to defeat the Yank Divine King. After all, the Yank Divine King is already seriously injured and at the end of his rope. At this thought Lon had an idea. She circulated her energy to heal her injuries for 4 hours. Once her injuries stabilized, she ended the treatment. She walked into another room and looked at Chao Qingyu, who was still unconscious and lying on the ground. She began to channel her energy. Whoosh, whoosh. She shot out a dazzling divine light and channeled her vigorous divine power into Chao Qingyu's body. As she healed Chao Qingyu, she also tried her best to wake him up. Her actions were effective. As she continued to channel her divine power into Chao Qingyu's body, Chao Qingyu's injuries began to heal faster. His divine soul, which had been in a deep slumber, also showed signs of awakening. This encouraged Lan, who worked even harder to channel her divine power into Chao Qingyu, regardless of the consequences. She was getting weaker and weaker, and her divine soul and consciousness were becoming more and more blurry. She was about to faint. However, she refused to let her guard down. She would rather pass out to awaken Chao Qingyu. This was because she knew that only Chao Qingyu had a chance of defeating the Yank Divine King. Very quickly 6 hours passed. Chao Qingyu's divine soul had recovered by more than half, and he gradually regained consciousness. He slowly opened his eyes. His dark red eyes were a little dim and he looked around in a daze. Seeing Lan, who was so close to him, he was stunned for a moment. Then he revealed a joyful smile and murmured, Lan, is that you? Am I dreaming or am I already dead? As he spoke, Chao Qingyu raised his arm and caressed Lan's cheek. Your injuries have healed and you've finally regained your original appearance? I'm so happy. Even if I die, I have no regrets now that I can see you again and return to my original appearance. Chao Qingyu's consciousness was still a little blurry, and he could not distinguish between dream and reality. He was full of joy as he murmured. Lan was also crying tears of joy. She held his hand tightly and shook her head. Qingyu, you've finally woken up. This is not a dream, we're both alive. It was the divine pill that you brought back that saved me. My injuries have already recovered and I've even broken through to the Divine King realm. However, the owner of the divine pill has chased me all the way here. Lan was very emotional, but she knew that this was not the time for romance. She hurriedly told Chao Qingyu about the current situation. Chao Qingyu was indeed a divine king. He quickly regained consciousness and understood the seriousness of the situation. Especially when Lan had exhausted all her energy to wake him up, and she was extremely weak. After explaining the situation, she was about to faint. Chao Qingyu hurriedly channeled a stream of divine power into her to protect her heart and divinity. He said solemnly, don't worry and have a good sleep. Leave the rest to me. I'll be back to see you soon. Hearing this, Lan was finally relieved. She slowly closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Chao Qingyu did not waste any more time. He got up and left the stone house, flying towards the sky in the distance. The heaven-destroying sword formation was unparalleled and powerful. However, this sword formation only trapped the Yank Divine King for 4 hours before it was broken. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to use other divine powers to continue attacking. The Yank Divine King was still calm. He blocked and dodged Ji Tianqing's attacks, and slowly recovered his injuries and divine power. As time passed, his injuries stabilized and his divine power gradually recovered. He had already made up his mind to deal with Ji Tianqing for 1 more day, and then find a way to kill him. However, at this moment, a majestic roar came from the depths of the divine palace. Chapter 3266. Yank, you really don't know what's good for you. How dare you chase me all the way here? A sudden angry roar boomed through the sky like a thunderclap. The sound waves reverberated through heaven and earth, causing the earth to tremble. It was the voice of a middle-aged man. It was deep and dignified, containing boundless anger and murderous intent. Ji Tianqing and the Yank Divine King stopped fighting and turned to look into the depths of the divine palace. The Yank Divine King's expression changed when he heard the familiar voice. His brows furrowed and his eyes turned grave. Damn it! That damned bastard, has he finally woken up? Judging from his voice and aura, has he already recovered from his injuries? The Yank Divine King's expression was ugly, his heart filled with anxiety and worry. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, heaved a sigh of relief when he heard the unfamiliar voice. Chao Qingyu, that brat is truly disappointing. He was unconscious for so long before waking up. But it's a good thing he's awake. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to defeat Yank. As the two watched, a dazzling beam of green light flew out from the depths of the divine palace. Whoosh! The beam of light arrived on the battlefield in the blink of an eye. After the light faded, a tall and imposing figure in green appeared. It was a middle-aged man in a green robe with a tall and sturdy figure. 2 pairs of crimson wings sprouted from his back. He had a square, dignified face and a full beard on both cheeks. Without a doubt, he was the Azure Jade Divine King Chao Qingyu. Chao Qingyu glanced at Ji Tianxing but didn't think much of it. He only nodded slightly to express his gratitude. Then he looked at the Yank Divine King and sized him up carefully. Finally he sneered, "Huh. Honorable Yank territorial ruler, haven't you always been in high spirits? How did you end up in such a miserable state? How did you end up in such a sorry state? Is this still the Yank I know?" The Yank Divine King was both humiliated and enraged by Chao Qingyu's mockery. He cursed viciously, "Chao Qingyu, don't you dare act so arrogantly, you bastard. Have you forgotten how I hunted you down for the past few decades and how you fled like a stray dog? You've suffered such heavy injuries. This king thought that you would use that divine pill to heal your injuries. I didn't expect you to be so pedantic as to give the pill to that lowly servant. So what if she refined the divine palate and broke through to the God King realm? I'll kill her sooner or later and refine her into a pill. On the other hand, you haven't recovered from your injuries and only have 50 to 60% of your strength. What can you do?" Lanzaz's and the Azure Jade Divine King was his bottom line. Hearing such ferocious words from the Rock God King, the Rock God King became extremely furious and unleashed soaring killing intent. "Yank, you're courting death." As he spoke, Chao Qingyu summoned a dark blue divine sword and slashed it at the Yank Divine King. Blue sky, falling rain of 1,000 stars. Chao Qingyu formed a sword seal with his left hand and brandished the sword with his right. Thousands of blue sword beams flooded the Yank Divine King's figure. The Yank Divine King appeared confident and savage, but he was actually worried, cautious and fearful. He swung his halberd with all his might to block the onslaught of sword beams, retreating as he fought. Bam, 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 bam. Sword beams and spear shadows clashed with deafening booms and destructive shockwaves. As expected, the Yank Divine King was at a disadvantage. He was knocked back dozens of miles and staggered. Ji Tianxing took this opportunity to strike. He used the dragon's proud slash. A dazzling golden sword thousands of meters long fell from the sky and slashed at the Yank Divine King. The Yank Divine King could only raise his halberd and block with all his might. Boom. Crack. Another thunderous boom exploded in the sky and spread for thousands of miles. The Yank Divine King was sent flying again, blood spurting from his nose and mouth. Seeing this scene, Chao Qingyu's face was filled with shock and disbelief. He had heard from Lan, or that a human youth named Tianxing had saved them and stopped the Yank Divine King. At the time, Chao Qingyu thought that Tianxing must also be a Divine King expert. But now he realized that Ji Tianxing was not a Divine King. He did not have the characteristics or aura of a Divine King expert. Ji Tianxing was only a peak Divine Lord, but he was able to repel Yank, a mid-level Divine King. This was simply an unimaginable miracle. Just as Chao Qingyu was in a daze, a divine soul voice transmission sounded in his mind. "What are you waiting for? Let's work together and kill Yank as soon as possible." Chao Qingyu snapped out of his daze and nodded at Ji Tianxing. He continued to attack Yank with his sword. Thus, the three experts engaged in a fierce battle in the sky. Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu worked together to attack Yank. Yank's injuries were stable and he had recovered some of his strength. But he could not gain any advantage under the combined attacks of the two. He was forced to retreat and his injuries were worsening rapidly. The three figures flashed in the sky as they chased each other. Hundreds of thousands of mystic arts were used by the three of them one after another, erupting with destructive power. Dazzling divine light filled the entire divine palace and covered thousands of miles. The mountain peak at the edge was quickly destroyed by the aftermath of the battle and turned into ruins. Fortunately, that seemingly simple and crude stone house was perfectly preserved. Before they knew it, 8 hours had passed. The three of them had already exchanged tens of thousands of blows. Ji Tianxing and Yank's injuries were severe and their strength was almost depleted. Even Chao Qingyu's injuries were worsening and his strength had regressed. But in comparison, Yank was the most miserable person. His injuries were terrible. Not only was there no intact flesh on his body, but one of his legs had also been cut off. At this point he had no chance of winning. No matter how unwilling he was, no matter how humiliated he was, he had to make up his mind. Run. Where there's life, there's hope. If he did not escape from the Green Jade Palace and continued to fight, it was very likely that he would be buried here. Thus, after blocking Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu's attacks, He turned and flew toward the divine palace's gates without hesitation. The gates were open and the divine array was destroyed. He watched as godly King Rock moved as fast as a beam of light. He was about to pass through the palace gates and escape the green jade divine palace. At this critical moment, Chao Qingyu formed a seal with both hands and used his trump card. Seal heaven and earth. He used his secret technique and released tens of thousands of beams of divine power that scattered throughout the divine palace. Instantly, the entire divine palace's array was activated and formed a barrier of light that spanned tens of thousands of miles. Under Chao Qingyu's control, the green jade palace rapidly shrank and suppressed Yank. At this moment, the green jade palace was like a divine artifact, but it was also like a super formation. In order to suppress and kill Yank, Chao Qingyu was willing to sacrifice this palace. Whoosh, whoosh. In a flash of light, Chao Qingyu left the palace with Ji Tianxing and appeared in the vast sea of clouds. The divine palace, which spanned tens of thousands of miles, shrank to the size of a water tank in just 10 breaths. The rock god king was sealed inside. He roared in fury and madness. Chapter 3267. The dazzling green jade palace was nowhere to be seen. It had become a rainbow-colored ball of divine light the size of a water tank. It was rapidly contracting and squeezing, flashing with dazzling light. The area around the ball of divine light had become a sea of white clouds. Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu stood in the sea of clouds. They both stared at the ball of rainbow divine light with anticipation. As for Lan Er, she had been stored in Chao Qingyu's divine artifact long ago. She was still unconscious. Chao Qingyu unleashed her Abhijna with all her might, controlling the 7-colored divine light formed by the divine palace to suppress Yan Ku. As long as he could kill or seal Yank, he would not hesitate to sacrifice this palace. However, Yank was not to be trifled with. Even though he was trapped in the verdant jade palace, he did not lose the ability to fight back. He was still struggling with all his might. He remained calm and tried all sorts of methods, including dozens of ultimate techniques to escape from the seal. Chao Qingyu could see Yank's state and movements in the verdant jade palace. Seeing Yank's full resistance, his expression turned serious. He did not dare to relax. This battle had become a showdown between the two of them. Ji Tianxing was watching the battle from the side. He saw that Chao Qingyu and Yanku had been fighting for an hour, but there was still no clear victor. Thus he took out divine pills and origin stones to quickly suppress his injuries and recover his divine power. Before he knew it, 6 hours had passed. Suddenly, Chao Qingyu's expression changed. He let out a low cry. Damn it! Oh no! As Chao Qingyu cried out in alarm, the ball of divine light in the clouds suddenly exploded. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion erupted from the clouds and reverberated through the heavens. The 7-colored divine light that the green jade palace had transformed into exploded into billions of divine light fragments on the spot, scattering into the sea of clouds. A blood-soaked, mutilated figure wrapped in blazing golden flames rushed out of the shards of divine light. Swish! With a flash of light, the tall figure with missing arms and legs streaked across the sky like a shooting star, heading straight for the south. Even though his injuries were extremely miserable, his entire body was burning with golden flames, his aura was extremely chaotic and his strength was extremely weak. However, he had a strong desire to survive, so he burst forth with his fastest speed. He flashed a few times in the sky and teleported 20,000 miles away, disappearing into the horizon. Without a doubt, the Yank Divine King used his ultimate trump card, burning his divine blood and 1,000 years of cultivation to unleash his greatest power, and successfully broke through the divine light seal. He didn't stop for even a moment. He ran south as fast as he could, away from Chao Qingyu and Ji Tianxing. The explosion of the colorful light represented the complete destruction of the green jade palace. Naturally, Chao Qingyu also suffered from the backlash. His body shook violently and blood spurted out from his mouth and nose. He only felt that the world was spinning and his consciousness was blurry. After a full 5 breaths, he finally stabilized his injuries and regained consciousness. Damn it! Yank still managed to escape. Chao Qingyu cursed in frustration. He hurriedly teleported across the sky and chased south. Ji Tianxing, who was recuperating, was also awakened by the sudden explosion. He ended his recuperation and opened his eyes, just in time to see Yank Divine King's back disappear into the sea of clouds. Seeing this scene, he furrowed his brow and muttered in surprise, Yank is injured to such an extent, but he can still unleash such great power? He originally thought that the duel between Chao Qingyu and Yank would take at least a day to end. However, he didn't expect Yank to pay such a heavy price and use his ultimate trump card to escape successfully. Seeing Chao Qingyu teleporting in the sky and chasing Yank with all his might, he waved his hand and said telepathically, no need to chase. Unfortunately, before he could finish speaking, Chao Qingyu teleported 20,000 miles away and disappeared into the sea of clouds. Ji Tianxing could only sigh. He didn't have any hope. As expected. About 15 minutes later, Chao Qingyu returned. His face was gloomy and his brows were tightly knitted. Ji Tianxing had already expected this. He just looked at him and said nothing. Chao Qingyu felt a little embarrassed. He explained regretfully, Yank escaped too quickly. He exceeded the range of my divine sense, so I couldn't determine his exact direction. Ji Tianxing noticed a little detail. A divine king like Chao Qingyu usually referred to himself as Your Majesty. However, he addressed himself as I, when speaking to him. It was clear that Chao Qingyu was not arrogant. Instead, he saw him as his benefactor. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, You were slower by a full 5 breaths. If you could still catch up to him, then he wouldn't be a divine king. Unfortunately. Chao Qingyu sighed and said worriedly, If I couldn't kill him this time, it will be harder in the future. With his strength, he can move unhindered in the northern heaven region. Almost no one can stop him. If he comes to seek revenge after he recovers, then it will be troublesome. Ji Tianxing pointed at the empty sea of clouds and said, Anyway, your green jade palace is gone. It won't stay here. How can he find you? Chao Qingyu was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, That's true. Although the palace is destroyed, Lan Er's injuries have healed and she has broken through to the Divine King realm. Everything I did was worth it. Of course, I have to thank young Master Tianxing for his help. If you hadn't saved me, I would still be unconscious. If you hadn't tried to stop Yank, we would have been killed by him long ago. Young Master Tianxing, we husband and wife will remember your life-saving grace in our hearts and will never forget it. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, Miss Lan Er told you everything about the incident. Chao Qingyu hurriedly nodded and explained, Lan Er exhausted all her divine power in order to wake me up. She has already fallen into a deep sleep. When I just woke up, she briefly recounted what happened previously. Only then did Ji Tianxing understand and said with a nod, I see. Chao Qingyu sized him up. Seeing that he was covered in blood and covered in wounds, there was still a thick weariness between his brows. He opened his mouth and said, Young Master Tianxing, Yank won't dare to come back in the short term. Your injuries are so serious. Quickly go and recuperate. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said with clasped hands, Since that's the case, then I'll take my leave. After saying that, he planned to turn and leave. He planned to fly out of the Cloud Sea secret realm and find a secluded place outside to recuperate. However, Yank stopped him and said, Young Master Tianxing, please wait. You were injured because of us. How can I let you leave alone? I know a place in the Cloud Sea secret realm that is convenient for recuperation. I'll take you there now. Don't worry about recuperating. I'll protect you. Ji Tianxing thought that it was a good idea and nodded in agreement. Thus, Chao Qingyu brought him across the vast sea of clouds and flew 200,000 miles to the east. Not long after, the two of them arrived at a whirlpool of clouds. After entering the whirlpool, they entered an alternate dimension. Chapter 3268. This alternate dimension was not big. It was only about 1,000 miles in radius. However, there were mountains and water, and the divine power of heaven and earth was abundant. There were no living creatures here. He was not afraid of being disturbed by anyone as he recuperated in seclusion. Ji Tianxing landed on a mountain peak. He found a place where divine power gathered and summoned the Jutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda. He entered the distorted space-time and returned to the blood flame sacred tree to recuperate in seclusion. This time in the Green Jade Palace, he had been fighting for so long and had suffered terrible injuries. He had long been exhausted and his mind was haggard. If he did not recuperate for a few years, it would be difficult for him to return to his peak state. In order to heal his injuries and recover his divine power, he not only absorbed the power of the blood flame sacred tree, but also took out more than 3 billion divine pills, divine stones and origin stones. Outside the divine pagoda, Chao Qingyu was also on the mountain peak. He kept a distance of 100 feet from the divine pagoda and sat cross-legged on a millstone. While he was guarding Ji Tianxing, he also let Lan out of the divine ring. Lan was still unconscious and lying quietly on the millstone. Chao Qingyu looked at Lan with a face full of self-blame. He quickly took out 2 king-level divine pills and fed them to her. Then he personally channeled his energy into Lan's body to help her refine the medicinal power. The mountain peak was quiet. Time passed quietly. Unknowingly, half a month had passed. With Chao Qingyu's help, Lan absorbed the medicinal power of the 2 king-level divine pills and recovered 40% of her injuries. She regained her consciousness. However, she was still very weak. Chao Qingyu let her recuperate for 3 more days. She waited until her condition had recovered a little before she ended her cultivation. There was no one else on the mountain peak. Yi Liangchuan was like water. The couple had been separated for 10,000 years. Now that they were finally reunited, they had time to reminisce. Their eyes met and they stared at each other for a long time. Tears welled up in Lan's eyes, but her face was filled with a happy smile. 10,000 years have passed. You're finally back. During those 10,000 years I was always in the dark. Do you know how lonely and desperate I was? Chao Qingyu's heart was filled with guilt. He quickly pulled her into his arms and said with a voice full of self-blame, Lan, it's all my fault. I've caused you so much pain and suffering. The couple hadn't seen each other for a long time. Their hearts had long been filled with strong emotions, and they had endless things to say. Now that they had opened their mouths, the 2 of them poured out their feelings of longing without stopping at all. Half a day, 1 day, 2 days, a full 4 days passed. Chao Qingyu and Lan were still hugging each other, whispering to each other. But at this moment, a divine light lit up at an untimely moment. Shua! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing flew out of the divine pagoda. Although only 22 days had passed in the outside world, he had already been recuperating in the distorted spacetime for 3 years. At this moment he was no longer in such a sorry state as before. He had regained his usual vigor. His white robe with golden patterns on it was spotless. His long hair was tied up in a bun and draped behind his head. There wasn't a trace of injury on his body. His divine power was well hidden, and his eyes were as deep and vast as the sea of stars. Through these 3 years of seclusion he had consumed billions of resources. Not only had his injuries healed, but his strength had also returned to peak condition. His strength had even increased. Ji Tianxing's sudden appearance broke the silence on the mountain peak. Chao Qingyu and Lan quickly stopped talking and turned to look at him. Seeing that Ji Tianxing's injuries had healed and his strength had completely recovered, the couple was shocked. Especially Lan, who couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh my God! It hasn't even been a month. Young Master Tianxing, how did you recover so quickly? Your previous injuries were clearly more serious than mine." Chao Qingyu didn't say anything, but his eyes were filled with excitement. After sizing up Ji Tianxing, his gaze landed on the black divine tower. He pondered for a while and vaguely guessed the answer. He said, "With young Master Tianxing's previous injuries and condition, it's impossible for him to recover in a month. Even a divine king can't do it. If I'm not wrong, young Master Tianxing's divine tower is no ordinary item. It should have the effect of accelerating time, right? Time acceleration, this sort of thing was nothing new to divine king powerhouses. Chao Qingyu had wandered the divine world for 10,000 years. He had seen too many miraculous things and could be considered knowledgeable. Ji Tianxing didn't hide it and nodded in acknowledgement. Lan was enlightened and said, "No wonder." Ji Tianxing came in front of the 2 and cupped his hands. He smiled and said, "Maybe I've appeared at the wrong time and disturbed you. You guys have experienced so many bumps and tribulations, only reuniting after 10,000 years. There must be a lot to talk about, right?" Hearing these words, Lan was rather bashful, lowering her head, not daring to look at his expression. But Chao Qingyu did not feel awkward and waved his hand and said, "No worries. Before you appeared, we've already caught up for 4 days. Since your injuries have already recovered, we can set our minds at ease too. Previously, you paid such a huge price in order to help and treat us. The 2 of us, husband and wife, discussed and decided to give a meager gift to express our thanks." As he said, Chao Qingyu was about to take out the thank you gift that he had prepared long ago from his interspatial ring. Even though he said it was a meager gift, he was a divine king expert. Only king-grade divine artifacts could be taken out. Originally, what Ji Tianxing needed the most right now was king-grade divine artifacts and materials. But he had other thoughts and waved his hand to stop Chao Qingyu. No need to give any thank you gift. I didn't help you guys for this. Chao Qingyu's movements froze and he said with a bitter smile. But you have to make us do something, pay a little something. Otherwise we won't feel at ease. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said without thinking, if you really want to repay me, why not tell me about what you've seen and experienced in these 10,000 years? I'm very interested in the world outside the boundless heaven continent, but I haven't been able to find any clues all along and know nothing about the outside world. Chao Qingyu was stunned for a moment and asked in disbelief, just that simple? This is also the... Ji Tianxing smiled faintly and said, it's insignificant to you. But to people who have never left the boundless heaven continent before and desire to understand the outside world, your knowledge is a priceless treasure. Hearing this sentence, Chao Qingyu was overwhelmed by the favor and felt rather proud in his heart. Lana was also full of anticipation and egged him on. Qingyu, what young Master Tianxing said makes sense. Not only does he want to hear about it, I also want to hear about your experience. Since Lana also wanted to hear about it, Chao Qingyu no longer declined. He cleared his throat and said, all right, then I'll start with the nearest continent. Back then I left the Tianbei region and went all the way south, searching for a way to treat Lana's illness along the way. About 30 years later I left the boundless heaven continent, crossed the Xiaolong Sea area in the south, and arrived at the firmament continent. That continent was located in the south of the boundless heaven continent. The territory area was similar to the boundless heaven continent. Chapter 3269. Chao Qingyu talked about his past experiences. The first place he mentioned was the firmament continent in the south of the boundless heaven continent. The territory of that continent was about the same as the boundless heaven continent. It was also a prosperous place. Like the boundless heaven continent, the firmament continent was also divided into hundreds of regions. Each region had a few to a dozen empires and dozens to hundreds of holy kingdoms under their jurisdiction. The overlords of each region were basically middle god kings and upper god kings. When Chao Qingyu traveled to the firmament continent, he was only a lower god king. Under normal circumstances, he could protect himself and deal with all dangers and crises. But once he encountered a middle-level divine king and region lord-level powerhouse, he could only flee in defeat. He was delayed in the firmament continent for more than 2,000 years. During this period he was in danger several times and almost lost his life. He once mistakenly entered an ancient relic in a secret realm and was trapped for hundreds of years. He was also seriously injured by a middle god king and almost lost his life. It took him 100 or 200 years to recover. Of course, he also had an opportunity to improve his strength greatly. After a few hundred years of seclusion, he broke through the realm. More than 2,000 years later, he left the firmament continent and headed northeast. When he heard this, Ji Tianxing raised a question and interrupted him. The overlord of the boundless heaven continent is the Shura god emperor. Do you know who the overlord of the firmament continent is? A peak god king? Or a god emperor? Chao Qingyu frowned and said with a chuckle, when I left the firmament continent, it was also more than 7,000 years ago. At that time, the firmament continent was like the boundless heaven continent. No one could unify all the regions. There were only countless region masters fighting. Ji Tianxing was a little disappointed and asked, so, you don't know the current situation of the firmament continent? Chao Qingyu nodded and said, after leaving the firmament continent, I never went back. It has been more than 7,000 years. However, when I was in other continents, I heard some god kings mention it. 1,000 years ago, there seemed to be a drastic change that rewrote the history of the god realm and made each continent have an overlord. According to them, the overlord of the firmament continent is the Nebula God Emperor. Nebula God Emperor? Ji Tianxing frowned. A cold light flashed in his eyes and he sneered in his heart. Dao Xingyun, Dao Xingyun. Back then, when you and a few other bastards attacked me, you were the weakest among the peak divine kings. You were the one with the lowest reputation and status. I didn't expect you to call yourself the God Emperor and control the firmament continent. As Ji Tianxing thought to himself, a figure involuntarily appeared in his mind. It was a handsome purple-robed god clan member in high spirits. His appearance was extraordinary and his temperament was feminine and reserved. Furthermore, he was also the youngest peak divine king apart from Kenshin. His talent and aptitude were extraordinary. Even though Dao Xingyun was the youngest among the 5 leading figures during the Pantheon War, he was the one with the least experience and authority. However, he must have used some means or had some adventures to control the firmament continent. Ji Tianxing sank into his memories, recalling the events of the past. Chao Qingyu glanced at him and asked in confusion, "Child Tianxing, have you heard of the Nebula God Emperor?" Ji Tianxing came back to his senses and shook his head. "I haven't even left the boundless heaven continent. How could I have heard of it?" Chao Qingyu dispelled his doubts and continued. "After leaving the firmament continent, I crossed the extremely dangerous stormy sea area and headed northeast. Because I heard that in the Qianquan continent in the northeast, there were a few famous peak alchemists who could refine elixirs that could transform the divine soul. The boundless sky sea was vaster than the continent, and there were too many ancient divine beasts. It was far more dangerous than the continent. In order to cross the stormy sea area and the boundless sea area, I spent 1,000 years and encountered more than a dozen life and death crises. In those 2 seas, I not only met the peerless powerhouses who lived in seclusion in the sky sea, but also met the dominating ancient divine beasts and countless species that had never been heard of before. Fortunately, after 1,000 years, I finally arrived at the Qianquan continent." Hearing Chao Qingyu mention the Qianquan continent and the situation of that continent, Ji Tianxing's memories were evoked. The Qianquan continent? At present, the structure of the heavenly realm hasn't changed. It's still the same as 1,000 years ago. There are only 4 continents and 1 reincarnation island. Haotian, Firmament, Qianquan, and Chaos are distributed in the 4 directions of the heavenly realm. The reincarnation island is located between the 4 continents. In addition to the continents, the heavenly realm is full of dangerous and mysterious seas. Chao Qingyu's tone was neither fast nor slow as she spoke tirelessly. The situation of the Qianquan continent he described was similar to Ji Tianxing's memory. The territory of the Qianquan continent was far larger than that of Haotian and Firmament. There were also more gods of various races. Of course, there were also more powerhouses on this continent. It was full of all kinds of strange people. Chao Qingyu described his experience in the Qianquan continent. For more than 2,000 years he had experienced hundreds of dangers and crises. But in the end he always found a way to turn danger into safety and save his life. Ji Tianxing listened quietly without any change in expression. On the other hand, Lan'er listened with great interest. Her heartstrings were tight. When Chao Qingyu was in danger, she secretly clenched her fists. Her heart was in her mouth. When Chao Qingyu turned danger into safety and even obtained treasures and opportunities, she was also happy and thankful. After a full 6 hours, Chao Qingyu finally finished talking about his experience in the Qianquan continent. Ji Tianxing asked again, "When you left the Qianquan continent, it should have been more than 3,000 years ago. At that time the Qianquan continent was also in a state of disunity. There was no overlord, right?" Chao Qingyu hurriedly nodded and explained, "That was indeed the case back then. But later I heard that the 9 Suns God Emperor ruled the Qianquan continent." 9 Suns God Emperor? Ji Tianxing frowned again. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Chao Qingyu had only heard of the 9 Suns God Emperor but did not know who he was. But Ji Tianxing knew very well that the 9 Suns God Emperor was called Lu Zhiyang. He was a descendant of the ancient god clan. This person's bloodline was noble and unparalleled. His divine soul had inherited the divine ability of his clan. He could be said to be the top ancient god in the god realm. During the Great War of the Gods, Lu Zhiyang was also the one with the highest status and prestige among the few peak divine kings. Ji Tianxing did not say much. Chao Qingyu continued to talk about his experience. When he left the Qianquan continent he still could not find a way to save Lan'er. So he went all the way south, crossed the endless sky sea and arrived at the 4th continent, the Primal Chaos continent. In comparison, the Primal Chaos continent's territory was the most vast. It also had the most gods and experts. This time Chao Qingyu stayed in the Primal Chaos continent for the longest time. It was close to 3,000 years. He personally experienced the changes in the god realm after the Great War of the Gods. A god emperor called Pan Ruo ruled the Primal Chaos continent. Chapter 3270. Chao Qingyu found a way to save Lan'er in the chaotic continent, which was the most spacious place with countless experts. It was the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir, a divine elixir that could transform one's bloodline and divine soul. After many years of investigation, Chao Qingyu finally found the whereabouts of the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir, which was obtained by Yank not long ago. Yank was a descendant of the Yen clan. His bloodline and talent were restricted, so he could only reach the 6th level of the Divine King realm. He was destined to never become an upper Divine King. Therefore he racked his brains to obtain the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir. He wanted to use this divine elixir to change his bloodline and talent so that he could reach the 7th level of the Divine King realm. However, he could not take it immediately. He had to wait until he reached the 6th level of the Divine King realm. Therefore Yank kept the divine elixir for future use. However, he did not expect that Chao Qingyu had his eyes on the divine elixir. He spent 100 years to disguise himself and sneak into the domain chief's manor. He investigated the whereabouts of the divine elixir step by step and grasped the defenses of the domain chief's manor. After nearly 100 years of planning, Chao Qingyu finally found the right opportunity to steal the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Elixir. However, Yank soon found out. He immediately abandoned everything and chased after Chao Qingyu with all his might. They set off from the Tianquan domain and fled toward the northwest, crossing half of the chaotic continent. After leaving the chaotic continent, they crossed the extremely dangerous Stormy Sea region. In order to get rid of Yank's pursuit, Chao Qingyu broke into the mysterious Reincarnation Island and tried to deal with Yank. One fled while the other chased. After 100 years, they finally returned to the Tianbei region of the Boundless Heaven continent. During this period of time, the two of them had fought countless times. At least 8 times, Chao Qingyu was severely injured by Yank and almost captured. However, he relied on his strong willpower and used all kinds of trump cards and methods to successfully escape. This also caused Chao Qingyu's injuries to accumulate. They had damaged the foundation of his divine path and could not be healed at all. Because of this, he endured his injuries and fled back to the Green Jade Palace. However, when he relaxed his mind, he immediately fell unconscious. Chao Qingyu was still talking about his experiences during his escape. Lan Er was listened attentively. Her heart was clenched, she was very worried and felt. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was distracted as he thought to himself, "Great wisdom Emperor God? How did the chaotic continent fall into her hands and be controlled by her? The heavens to God Emperor she was the emperor of the King dynasty. Among the 5 divine kings, heavens, emperor the heavens to heavens. Before the eternal heavenly book appeared in the world, Pan Ruo was only a 9th degree divine king. She was still a step away from becoming a peak divine king. To Lan to heavens. Heavens, the fame of these 2 experts was too great, their halos too dazzling. In heavens was Ins. There was no enmity between Kenshin and Pan Ruo. They even had some friendship. After all, Pan Ruo had sparred with Kenshin. She had discussed the divine path with Kenshin and received some pointers. Even when Pan Ruo wanted to refine the Heaven's Heart pill, she had to ask Kenshin for help. Although the two of them were not very good friends, they were definitely not enemies either. However, when the Heaven's Punishing Array and Eternal Heavens book appeared, Pan Ruo was tempted by Yuming and Lu Zhiyang. She joined the team to kill Kenshin and became one of the 5 leaders. Kenshin was not surprised by this. He did not blame Pan Ruo for biting the hand that fed her. He understood Pan Ruo's character. She was cold as ice and cut off her emotions and desires. She only pursued the divine path. Pan Ruo could give up everything in order to pursue the divine king realm. It was reasonable for her to collude with Lu Zhiyang, Yuming and Azura to obtain the Heaven's Punishing Array. However, there was one thing that Ji Tianxing did not understand. After his death, the Netherworld Divine King should have ruled the chaotic continent. How could it be Pan Ruo? If the ruler of the chaotic continent was Pan Ruo, then what about the Netherworld Divine King? Could it be that this person did not understand the mysteries of heaven and did not break through the God Emperor realm? Was he still a peak Divine King? Or, after Kenshin's death, the 5 divine kings killed each other in order to obtain the Heaven's Eternal Heavens book? With this question in mind, Ji Tianxing asked Chao Qingyu, "When you were dealing with Yank on the Reincarnation Island, it should have been a few hundred years ago. Who was the ruler of the Reincarnation Island?" Chao Qingyu had expected him to ask this question. He answered without hesitation, "The god of the underworld." "I see." Ji Tianxing was relieved. Seeing that he had stopped asking, Chao Qingyu continued to talk about his escape. Ji Tianxing's mind started to wander again. He thought to himself, the Netherworld and Panruo both came from the chaotic continent. Especially the Netherworld, the foundation of his power is in the chaotic continent. Logically speaking, the chaotic continent's territory, population and resources are dozens of times more than the Reincarnation Island. Why did the Netherworld not rule the chaotic continent but choose the Reincarnation Island? Could it be that he and Panruo both comprehended the Heavens Eternal Heavens book and both broke through to the God Emperor realm, but he was not as strong as Panruo? Or is it because the Reincarnation Island has an eternal space passage that leads to the Dragon realm? The Netherworld wanted to guard the passage between the God realm and the Dragon realm, so he chose to occupy the Reincarnation Island? Ji Tianxing secretly guessed, but he could not confirm the answer. He would probably only be able to solve the mystery if he went to the Reincarnation Island personally or met the God of the Underworld and Panruo, the God Emperor. Ever since he came to the God realm, he had been thinking of ways to gather information and understand the situation in the God realm. Whether it was in the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom or the Great Yan Empire, he could not find any clues. Fortunately, he had come to the Green Jade Palace and met Chao Qingyu. Only then did he get the answers and information he wanted. The current situation was no different from 1,000 years ago. There were still 4 continents and 1 reincarnation island. In the endless sky ocean, there were dozens of sea regions where countless divine beasts, powerful immortals, and many blessed grotto heavens and mystic realms were hidden. However, the biggest difference between now and 1,000 years ago was that the 4 continents and the reincarnation island all had overlords. Moreover, the 5 overlords who stood at the peak of the God realm and had reached the God Emperor realm were the 5 people who had killed Kenshin back then. At the thought of this, Ji Tianxing was filled with anger, and killing intent surged in his heart. The 5 bastards who tried to kill me back then have all taken the last step to stand at the peak of the God realm and become the God Emperor that everyone looks up to. However, I fell under their siege and was reincarnated 1,000 years later to make a comeback. If I want to take revenge and kill those 5 bastards, how difficult will that be? The 5 great territories of the God realm are all controlled by my enemies. Now I am truly surrounded by enemies. In this life, the 5 God Emperors had become even more powerful, and their forces and foundations were even more stable. If Ji Tianxing wanted to take revenge, the difficulty had increased tenfold. He had not even reached the God King realm, let alone the God Emperor realm, which was above the God King realm. Chapter 3271. Understanding the situation in the divine world, Ji Tianxing felt even more pressure and secretly made up his mind to work harder. At the same time, he was also secretly vigilant. In the future, he had to pay more attention to secrecy and absolutely not expose his identity. After all, the 4 continents and Reincarnation Island were all enemies' territories. Once his true identity was exposed, it would be known by the 5 God Emperors very quickly. At that time, even if he recovered to the Divine King realm, he would also be strangled by the several God Emperors. In his previous life, his strength realm was the same as those 5 God Emperors. They were all peak Divine Kings. Therefore, even if he fell, he could still reverse reincarnation and heaven's secrets, retain his remnant soul with a secret art and reincarnate. But this life was different. Those 5 people all became God Emperors. Their means must be exceedingly formidable, unfathomable. Once he fell into the hands of a certain God Emperor, he would definitely die thoroughly. It was absolutely impossible to have the chance to reincarnate again. Thinking up to here, Ji Tianxing secretly clenched both fists, his eyes becoming determined. At this time, Chao Qingyu also finished talking about his escape experience. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was still distracted, Chao Qingyu could not help but take a few more glances at him, his expression somewhat subtle. Lan'er did not detect the abnormality and did not think too much. She asked Ji Tianxing, "Young Master Tianxing, you're so concerned about matters outside the boundless heaven continent. Do you want to go outside and make a name for yourself? With your strength and talent, you'll definitely become a divine king in time. Furthermore, I can also see that you're unwilling to be mediocre and have lofty ambitions. You definitely won't stay in the boundless heaven continent forever." Ji Tianxing's thoughts were interrupted and he hurriedly came back to his senses. After hearing Lan'er's words, he just smiled and said, "It's not as complicated as you think. I'm just very curious about the outside world, that's all. Oh right, both of your injuries are somewhat stubborn. I'm afraid it will harm the foundation of your divine Tao. To be on the safe side, You guys still have to go into long-term close seclusion for treatment. Chao Qingyu nodded and said, Young Master Tianqing, rest assured. I've long made preparations and plans. The Divine Palace is already destroyed. This place is also not suitable to stay for long. We will go to a place, find a person and ask him for help. Ji Tianqing nodded. That's good. Lan Er asked again, Young Master Tianqing, your injuries have already healed and your condition has recovered. What plans do you have after today? Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and said with a slight smile, Tianbei region is too small. I want to go all the way south and travel around, to experience the glory of the boundless heaven continent. What about you guys? What plans do you have? Lan Er revealed a faint smile and replied, Let's go find that person first and ask him to treat our injuries. After we recover, we will find a secluded place where no one will disturb us, build another divine palace and live in seclusion from the world. My wife and I have experienced too many dangers and tribulations. We have also endured too much pain and suffering. After being separated for tens of thousands of years, it was like being reborn. Being able to reunite was a blessing from the heavens. From now on we will never be separated again. As she spoke, she hugged Chao Qingyu's arm. The husband and wife looked at each other and revealed happy and satisfied smiles. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing also nodded in agreement and said with a smile, After seeing all the vanity of the world, you will know that ordinary is true. You have experienced so many hardships, you must cherish each other's fate. In the future, it is also very good to be an immortal couple that is envied by the world and not disturbed. Having known each other for a while, Ji Tianqing expressed sympathy for their experience. Now that he saw them happily reunited, he also wished them well in his heart. Both sides exchanged a few words of greeting and Ji Tianqing bowed and bade farewell. Lan Er stayed in the alternate space. Chao Qingyu took the initiative to offer to send Ji Tianqing off. Swoosh, swoosh. Two white lights flashed. Ji Tianqing and Chao Qingyu left the alternate space and appeared amidst the vast sea of clouds. Standing amidst the clouds, Ji Tianqing cupped his hands toward Chao Qingyu and said, Divine King Qingyu, there is no need to send us off. Let us part ways here. You must recover as soon as possible in case Yang comes back for revenge. Chao Qingyu cupped his hands in return. Thank you for the reminder, young master. I know what to do. Then I will take my leave. Ji Tianqing said no more and turned to fly away. Chao Qingyu hesitated for a moment and finally made up his mind. He raised his hand and shouted, Young master, please wait. Young master, please wait. I have a few questions to ask. Ji Tianqing stopped and turned to look at him. Divine King Qingyu, what do you want to say? Chao Qingyu frowned slightly and stared at him. He said in a low voice, Although I have only spent a short time with young master, it has brought back many memories. I still remember that more than 1,300 years ago, I was traveling the Chaos Continent in search of a way to save Lan Er. I once met a human divine king in the Inferno Sea. He was a supremely talented expert of the sword Dao. Back then, due to a misunderstanding, I attacked that divine king. I was clearly 2 levels higher than that divine king, but he easily countered my moves and defeated me in 3 moves. That divine king didn't kill me and even gave me some pointers. Only then did I have an epiphany and break through my bottleneck. Chao Qingyu revealed a look of reminiscence as he recounted the events of the past. Ji Tianqing was on high alert but didn't show it on his face. Chao Qingyu sighed and smiled wryly. Speaking of which, that human divine king taught me a lot, but I don't even know his name. With that, he stared at Ji Tianqing and observed Ji Tianqing's reaction. Ji Tianqing didn't show anything unusual. He smiled and said, Humans are rare to begin with. It's normal for Divine King Qingyu to recall the past when he saw me. Seeing that he didn't reveal any flaws, Chao Qingyu tried again. This is indeed one of the reasons. However, what surprised me the most was that when I saw young Master Tianqing, it was as if I saw that divine king. Your figure, appearance and temperament are very similar to that human divine king. If not for the fact that you haven't reached the divine king realm, I would almost believe you to be that divine king. Ji Tianqing pretended to be stunned before revealing an expression of shock and disbelief. Divine King Qingyu, you say that I'm very similar to that human divine king? Isn't that too inconceivable? There are no 2 identical leaves in the world, much less 2 identical people. Furthermore, by comparing me to that divine king, aren't you overestimating me too much? For that human divine king to be able to teach you, It shows that his strength and attainments in the Sword Dao have reached the acme of perfection. I haven't even reached the Divine King realm, so how can I compare to that human Divine King? Seeing that Ji Tianxing's reaction was still normal without any clues, Chao Qingyu was still unwilling to give up. After a moment of silence he continued, "However, I see that young Master Tianxing's Sword Dao has reached the point of perfection. It's admirable. In fact, the Sword Dao divine ability you used was also used by that human Divine King back then. Is this just a coincidence?" Clearly, Chao Qingyu had long suspected Ji Tianxing's true identity. However, this was no trivial matter. He didn't dare to ask rashly, so he endured until now and secretly tested Ji Tianxing. Chapter 3272. Previously, Ji Tianxing had made up his mind to keep it a secret and not reveal his true identity. Now that Chao Qingyu was suspicious and probed repeatedly, all the more he could not reveal any flaws. After pondering for a moment, he also revealed a puzzled look and pretended to be at a loss. Is there really such a strange thing? This must be a coincidence. Divine King Azure Jade might not know, but many of the divine powers and moves of the human race look very similar. Especially the Sword Dao, it has many variations but does not deviate from the root. The similarity is very high. After all, those godly kings and godly lords would verify each other when comprehending and creating some Sword Dao divine powers. The most common thing everyone does is to learn and borrow from the cultivation methods of their predecessors. After tens of thousands of years of development, the divine powers and cultivation methods that everyone cultivates naturally become more and more similar. Ji Tianxing blindly came up with this specious theory and finally managed to muddle his way out of it. Even if Chao Qingyu still had some doubts, he could not refute and could only nod in agreement. Young Master Tianxing's words make sense. From the looks of it, I was indeed overthinking. I hope young Master Tianxing doesn't mind. I was just overwhelmed with emotions and recalled those memories because of the scenery. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said with a smile, "Divine King Azure Jade, there's no need to be so polite. You have experienced so many hardships and dangers, it's normal to have some emotions. All right, if there's nothing else, then I'll take my leave." Chao Qingyu did not say anything else. He cupped his fists at Ji Tianxing and bowed solemnly, saying, "Thank you again for saving my life, young Master Tianxing. I don't know when we will meet again after this parting. I wish young Master Tianxing a smooth path to the divine Dao and reach the peak." Ji Tianxing smiled and waved at him. He turned and flew towards the vast sea of clouds all the way south. Chao Qingyu stood in place and waited for a full 7 minutes. When Ji Tianxing disappeared 30,000 miles away, he turned and left. Swoosh. Returning to the alternate dimension, he flew across the sky unhurriedly to meet up with Lon. Along the way, he kept frowning as hundreds of thoughts flashed through his mind. Did I really remember wrongly? Was he thinking too much? But this shouldn't be the case. I remember that human God King's appearance, gaze and temperament clearly. Compared to young Master Tianxing, there was no difference at all. How could there be two people who looked so similar in this world? Could it be that the human God King had lost his memories? But this wasn't right either. Even if he lost his memories, his cultivation realm wouldn't regress and return to the Divine Lord realm. Or was young Master Tianxing the son of that human God King? That makes sense, but looking at young Master Tianxing's reaction, it doesn't seem to be. Chao Qingyu was puzzled. When he landed on the peak of the mountain, Lan'er saw that he was frowning and asked, "Qingyu, have you sent Sir Tianxing away? Why are you frowning? What happened?" Chao Qingyu hurriedly suppressed his chaotic thoughts and said with a slight smile, "Don't worry, nothing happened. Young Master Tianxing has already left. We should also leave this place and go find Brother Yen for help. Not seeing him for 10,000 years, I wonder how he's doing recently. Did he break through again?" Lan'er did not ask any more either. She nodded and said, "All right, then let's set off right away." Hence, husband and wife left the alternate dimension and flew over the vast sea of clouds together, flying towards the southeast. At the same time, located in the central region of the North Heaven region, a puzzling thing happened in the Wind Frost Empire. The Wind Frost Empire was located in the south of the Great Yen Empire. The territory, area and population were more than the Great Yen Empire. In comparison, the Wind Frost Empire's forces and foundation were somewhat more robust than the Great Yen Empire. 5,000 years ago, there were still frequent wars between the two great empires. But the Wind Frost Empire lost more than one. However, ever since the Great Yen Empire negotiated peace with the Wind Frost Empire, It had been peaceful all along. For close to 5,000 years, the Wind Frost Empire had been peaceful all along. Nothing major happened. The people and gods of the more than 10 divine kingdoms were all recuperating, living in harmony and peace. However, since half a month ago the Wind Frost Emperor had issued an oracle, breaking the peace that had lasted for 5,000 years. No one knew what the Wind Frost Emperor wanted to do, to actually transfer high divine lords from the various divine kingdoms. In order to ensure the number and to make the various divine kingdoms obey the order, the Wind Frost Emperor actually issued a mission. 15 divine kingdoms, each divine kingdom had to transfer at least 20 high divine lords. Furthermore, this mission had a time limit of 2 months to complete. The divine kingdoms that were unable to complete the mission would have to bear the wrath and punishment of the Wind Frost Emperor. And the divine kingdoms that exceeded the quota would be rewarded by the Wind Frost Emperor. When the oracle reached the various divine kingdoms, it caused an uproar in the 15 divine kingdoms. Although 20 high divine lords were not many, it was also an extremely powerful force. Every high divine lord was the pillar of the various divine kingdoms. Nothing could happen to them easily. The various divine kingdoms' monarchs were anxious and uneasy, secretly guessing the Wind Frost Emperor's intentions. Some people guessed that the Wind Frost Emperor did this to snatch the high divine lords and bring them under the empire's command. His goal was to weaken the various divine kingdoms' power. Some people also guessed that the Wind Frost Emperor was gathering experts to prepare for war. After the 300 high divine lords were gathered, the Wind Frost Emperor would most likely start a war. And the Wind Frost Empire's first target would definitely be the Great Yan Empire in the north, followed by the 2 neighboring empires. Some people guessed that the Wind Frost Emperor had always been at the peak of the Divine Lord realm and had never been able to break through to the Divine King realm. This time the Wind Frost Emperor had gathered 300 high divine lords because he had obtained an ancient evil technique. He needed to sacrifice 300 high divine lords to help him break through to the Divine King realm. The high divine lords that were transferred from various divine kingdoms were to be sacrificed and sent to the empire's imperial city to die. These 3 theories were more mainstream and spread widely, causing people to be in a state of panic. Other than that, there were hundreds of big and small rumors that were spread widely in various divine kingdoms. For a time, many divine kingdoms were filled with rumors, causing the people's hearts to waver. Not long after, there were rumors that came out of the empire's imperial city. It was said that the Wind Frost Emperor had also issued an oracle, ordering the empire's officials to gather the best cultivation resources and store them in the imperial palace. For a month, every day, there would be a large number of imperial guards escorting priceless resources and treasures into the imperial palace's treasury. After this news spread, the various divine kingdoms' experts were even more certain of their guesses. The Wind Frost Emperor was either preparing for war, preparing to attack the Great Yan Empire, or he wanted to use the ancient evil technique to sacrifice 300 high divine lords and a sea of resources in order to break through to the Divine King realm. As a result, the various divine kingdoms' monarchs felt even more conflicted. Even if they were 100 times unwilling, they had to follow the oracle and think of ways to transfer 20 high divine lords. But no one knew that these 2 oracles were not the Wind Frost Emperor's original intention. Chapter 3273. The Wind Frost Emperor was a peak godlord with unparalleled power. Only a god king could defeat, control and turn him into a puppet. This matter started more than 20 days ago. At that time Yang, who was seriously injured, tried his best to escape from the Cloud Sea mystic realm. He was afraid that Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu would chase after him, so he did not dare to stop and rest. He fled south without stopping. In just 2 days he escaped from the Great Yan Empire and fled into the Wind Frost Empire. At that moment he saw that Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu did not chase after him. He relaxed and finally breathed a sigh of relief. His injuries were too serious. Not only was his divine power exhausted, but his divine body was also seriously injured. He had lost an arm and a leg. If he continued to flee south he would be like Chao Qingyu. He would not be able to hold on for long before fainting. In the completely unfamiliar Tianbei region, if he fell unconscious, the consequences would be unimaginable. Therefore he decided to stay in the Wind Frost Empire and recuperate before making any plans. He had brought many cultivation resources with him, enough for him to recuperate in seclusion. However, he did not have a suitable place for seclusion. With only those cultivation resources, his recovery speed was very slow. Seeing that the Wind Frost Empire was prosperous and rich with cultivation resources, he had an idea. He first entered a kingdom and entered the kingdom's royal city. After half a day, he found out the situation in the kingdom's royal city and successfully sneaked into the royal palace. Taking advantage of the dead of night, he found the kingdom's treasure vault, cracked the defense array, and plundered the treasure vault for resources. Although the treasure vault contained a huge amount of cultivation resources and treasures, it could be said to be extremely rich. However, Yang did not care about those ordinary treasures and resources at all. He only found a small number of top-grade resources and treasures. After escaping the treasure vault, he quietly left the royal city and hid in a remote mountain to recuperate in seclusion for 7 days. The cultivation resources and divine pills he stole were all the best in the kingdom. They were worth more than 50 billion. Even so, he could only heal his external injuries and recover 30% of his strength after using those resources and divine pills. If he wanted to completely heal his injuries and return to his peak state, he had to obtain more resources and treasures of a higher grade. Ordinary divine kingdoms could no longer satisfy his needs. His target was naturally the Wind Frost Empire. Therefore, he used a secret technique to disguise himself as a member of the Frost God race and rushed to the Frost God Empire's imperial city. The imperial city was indeed magnificent, vast in scale and flourishing in prosperity. Yang hid in the imperial city for a day and understood the strength and heritage of the Frost Empire. He immediately changed his mind. He was no longer satisfied with just sneaking into the treasury and stealing large amounts of resources and treasures. He had an even bolder idea. It was another dark and windy night. Yang snuck into the palace and searched for the whereabouts of the emperor. Even though the imperial palace was heavily guarded both inside and outside, with many experts overseeing it, it could be said to be heavily guarded. But that could only guard against divine monarch powerhouses. It definitely could not stop a divine king like him. With his strength and means, he was able to enter the imperial palace without being detected by anyone. At that time, the Feng Shuang emperor was dealing with government affairs in the study room, in a lazy and leisurely state. After all, the Wind Frost Empire had been peaceful for 5,000 years. Without the threat of external enemies, the Wind Frost Emperor also relaxed his vigilance. He was also a peak divine monarch. Before obtaining the opportunity to break through to the divine king realm, there was no need for him to cultivate in seclusion. Normally, he cultivated his mind, comprehended the principles of heaven and earth, and took care of the empire's government affairs. Under such circumstances, the Wind Frost Emperor was not on guard at all. He had already been targeted by a divine king powerhouse. The result was indisputable. Yang entered the study room without anyone noticing and used a king-level divine array to seal the study room. This way, no matter what happened in the study room, the outside world would not know. The Wind Frost Emperor was immediately alert and took out his dragon sword to search for enemies. But he was destined to be a tragedy. No matter what he did, it was useless. In order to save time and not cause too much of a commotion, Yang did not appear. He maintained his invisible state and brazenly attacked the Wind Frost Emperor, injuring him in one move. The Wind Frost Emperor endured his injuries and was about to call for help and resist. Yang used his secret technique again and attacked continuously. The Wind Frost Emperor had no strength to fight back and was stunned. In less than 3 breaths' time, he was subdued by Yang and captured on the spot. Only now did Yang reveal his true face. He was 10 zhang tall and extremely majestic. Standing in the study room, his head almost reached the ceiling. His wide and huge palms grabbed the Wind Frost Emperor tightly and sealed his strength, making him unable to move. Seeing Yang's appearance, the Wind Frost Emperor was shocked. His heart was in turmoil. Other race? Divine King Powerhouse? Although he was panicking and confused, the Wind Frost Emperor quickly calmed down and pretended to be calm. He asked, "How did I offend you to make you go to such lengths?" He believed that there was no such thing as hatred for no reason. As long as he could communicate with Yang, there would be room to turn the situation around. However, the Wind Frost Emperor did not expect that Yang had never thought of communicating with him. Yang did not need to negotiate but simple and crude control. Under the Wind Frost Emperor's terrified and panicked eyes, Yang did not say a word and directly used a secret technique to control the Wind Frost Emperor's divine soul. The Wind Frost Emperor struggled violently. His desire to live was very strong. He first tried to communicate with Yang, then begged Yang for mercy and said that he was willing to obey. However, Yanku was stubborn. He didn't listen to him at all. Expressionlessly, he used the soul secret technique. Half an hour later, the Wind Frost Emperor fell unconscious and his divine soul was controlled by Yang. Only then did Yang put down the Wind Frost Emperor and used a ray of divine power to wake him up. Although the Wind Frost Emperor did not seem to have changed after waking up. However, he had become very quiet and was very obedient and respectful towards Yang. From this moment on, the Wind Frost Emperor became Yang's puppet and was 100% obedient to Yang. Even if Yang ordered him to kill himself, he would not hesitate at all. Of course, Yang turned him into a puppet to plan something big. How could he let him die? This king needs a good place to cultivate and heal in seclusion for a while. In addition, this king also needs the best divine pills, divine stones and cultivation resources of the Wind Frost Empire. Moreover, this matter must be kept absolutely secret. Other than you, no one else can know. Everything you do, everything you give, everything you do must be in your name. You must not mention this king. Yang did not waste any more words and directly gave the order to the Wind Frost Emperor. The Wind Frost Emperor bowed and listened. After Yang finished speaking, he nodded solemnly and said, "Yes, my lord. This old servant will do his best to complete it in the shortest time possible." The high and mighty Wind Frost Emperor of the past had become Yang's servant just like that. This was the power of the Divine Soul Secret Technique. Chapter 3274. The Wind Frost Emperor did not care about his injuries. He did his best to complete the task as fast as possible. Inside the palace, there was the safest and most luxurious underground secret room. That was where he usually cultivated in seclusion. His divine power was incomparably abundant, and countless top cultivation resources were stored there. Without a doubt, that secret room belonged to Yang. After settling down Yang and waiting for Yang to begin his seclusion in the secret room to heal his injuries, the Wind Frost Emperor carried out the second task without stopping. He issued an oracle overnight, ordering the officials to transport the best cultivation resources and treasures from the various counties of the empire to the imperial city as soon as possible. At the same time, the guards guarding the treasury also picked out the most precious resources and treasures overnight and hurriedly sent them to the Wind Frost Emperor. Then the Wind Frost Emperor personally brought those resources and treasures to the secret room to see Yang. Just like that, Yang settled down in the palace and went into seclusion to heal his injuries. The Wind Frost Emperor did not care about the speculations and criticisms of the ministers. He stubbornly searched for resources and treasures and sent them to Yang. In the next 20 days, other than healing his injuries, he only focused on one thing. That was to supervise the various counties to search for the best resources and transport them to the imperial city as soon as possible. As time passed, the Wind Frost Emperor's orders and the strange movements of the various counties of the empire caused a lot of discussion among the people of the empire. The ministers also racked their brains to guess the Wind Frost Emperor's intentions and even tried to probe. But the Wind Frost Emperor did not have any abnormalities, and he absolutely kept the secret and was not willing to reveal anything. 23 days later, it was late at night again. As usual, the Wind Frost Emperor went to the secret room alone to visit Yang and report the situation of the resources. After more than 20 days of seclusion, Yang used more than 200 billion worth of top resources and his injuries recovered extremely quickly. His internal and external injuries were almost healed. Only the injuries of his divine soul still needed to be slowly healed. As for his strength, he had recovered about 70%. In the secret room and his spatial ring, there were still more than 300 billion worth of cultivation resources piled up. At most, he would use another 100 billion worth of cultivation resources to recover to his original state. At this time, Yang issued a new order to the emperor. In your name, gather at least 300 high divine lords within a month, the more the better. All the high divine lords that have been gathered, gather in the imperial city and await this king's orders. The Wind Frost Emperor bowed without hesitation and said, yes. He obeyed Yang's orders unconditionally. However, after hesitating for a moment, he still reported truthfully, reporting to my lord within the borders of the Frost Empire, The number of high divine lords has barely reached 300. However, there are only 120 of them under my command. If we were to forcefully conscript 300 high-level divine lords, it would definitely cause chaos in the empire. Yank understood what he meant. He waved his hand and said, "If the Wind Frost Empire doesn't have enough people, then we'll recruit from a dozen divine kingdoms. Those 15 divine kingdoms are all vassal states of the Wind Frost Empire. How can they disobey orders?" The Wind Frost Emperor let out a sigh of relief and smiled as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He said, "If that's the case, then it's easy. Master, please rest assured that this old servant will complete the mission within a month." Yank Divine King nodded in satisfaction and encouraged him with a few words. The Wind Frost Emperor enjoyed it and was a little excited. Thus, he mustered up his courage and asked, "This old servant would like to ask why my lord has gathered 300 high divine lords? Master, please don't blame me. This old servant wants to know your plans so that I can make preparations and arrangements in advance." Yank Divine King did not get angry. His expression was cold as he said indifferently, "Those 300 high divine lords are naturally to be cannon fodder for this king. This king wants to bring them to the great Yan Empire to take revenge and kill those 3 bastards." The Wind Frost Emperor's body trembled, his expression somewhat ugly. Even though he had become a puppet and was absolutely loyal to Yank, he had not lost his ability to think. He was very clear that once those 300 high divine lords were killed, the blow to the Wind Frost Empire would be incomparably heavy. Thus he secretly changed his mind. Originally, he wanted to take 10 high divine lords from each divine kingdom and 150 high divine lords from the Wind Frost Empire. Now he decided that each divine kingdom would gather 20 high divine lords, and the Wind Frost Empire would not send a single one. After a moment of silence, the Wind Frost Emperor bowed and said, "Master, if you have no other instructions, this old servant will take his leave." Yank waved his hand again, indicating for him to leave. After the Wind Frost Emperor left, Yank continued to recuperate in seclusion. That night, the Wind Frost Emperor issued an oracle to the 15 vassal countries under his command. The oracle clearly requested that each divine kingdom send 20 high divine lords to gather at the imperial city as soon as possible. This matter was given a month to complete. If there was a deadline, those who did not complete the mission would be severely punished. If any divine kingdom completed the mission, they would be rewarded by him. Very quickly, this oracle spread throughout the various divine kingdoms. The 15 divine kingdoms were in an uproar. Countless experts were talking about it. In addition, the matter of the Wind Frost Emperor wantonly plundering cultivation resources was also known by the various divine kingdoms. For a moment, the 15 divine kingdoms were discussing animatedly, secretly guessing the Wind Frost Emperor's intentions. When the Wind Frost Emperor learned of this, he did not have much of a reaction. After all, no matter how unwilling those 15 divine kingdoms were, they also did not dare to disobey his orders. The mission that Yank gave them would definitely be completed within the time limit. Time passed very quickly. 44 days passed just like that. Under the Wind Frost Emperor's unyielding orders, the 15 divine kingdoms indeed completed the mission within the time limit. In a mere 20 days, 300 high divine lords from the 15 divine kingdoms gathered at the imperial city. After the Wind Frost Emperor reported this news to Yank, Yank immediately stopped his seclusion to recuperate and left the secret chamber. In any case, he had consumed another 100 billion resources, so his injuries were not serious. His strength had also recovered to 90%. Now that the cannon fodder had been gathered, his thirst for revenge was unbearable. He was not willing to wait a day longer. He cast an art to enter a state of invisibility and followed the Wind Frost Emperor out of the secret chamber. In the square of the imperial palace, Yank saw the 300 high divine lords. The strength of those high divine lords was around stage 7 or stage 8. Their morale was somewhat low. However, Yank did not care about this. In any case, in his eyes, those high divine lords were no different from dead people. Next, the Wind Frost Emperor personally spoke, saying many things to boost morale. He deliberately misled the 300 high divine lords, saying that he would personally lead everyone to the great Yan Empire. Naturally, many of the high divine lords thought that this expedition was to attack the great Yan Empire. To be able to follow the emperor and build a career was not to die. Instead, it was an excellent opportunity for promotion and wealth. Thus, the morale of many high divine lords soared, their blood boiling. Chapter 3275. On the surface, the Wind Frost Emperor was the commander-in-chief of this northern expedition. Those who followed him were all high-ranked divine lords. There were exactly 300 of them. However, in reality, it was impossible for the Wind Frost Empire not to send a single powerhouse. At the very least, the Imperial Guard Governor and 18 Imperial Revered Elders had to accompany him. Their mission was to protect the Wind Frost Emperor. When necessary, they would also participate in the war. As such, the number of high-ranked divine lords led by Yank reached 320. They rode on 2 Supreme-grade Monarch-grade divine ships and flew across the sky as fast as lightning. They sped all the way north. In just 4 days, the 2 divine ships left the Wind Frost Empire and arrived at the border of the Great Yan Empire. The border between the 2 empires was an endless mountain range. The towering mountain range in front of the 2 divine ships was called the Sol Dang Mountain. This was a place that military strategists would fight for. The mountain was steep and easy to defend but difficult to attack. 5,000 years ago, the 2 empires often had conflicts. Occasionally, they would even trigger a large-scale war. At that time, the Sol Dang Mountain was heavily guarded. There were experts guarding it for a long time. Although there were fewer conflicts between the 2 empires in the past 5,000 years, there were no more wars. However, the Great Yan Empire had been injured too many times. They were still wary of the Wind Frost Empire. As a result, although the guards guarding the Sol Dang Mountain were reduced, they never left. Currently, the Sol Dang Mountain was guarded by 100,000 elite Great Yan soldiers. The commander-in-chief was the Great Yan Emperor's trusted aide, the Great General of the South. The 2 deputy commanders were also famous generals in the empire with outstanding military exploits. Both of them were upper divine monarchs of the 8th degree realm. At this moment, the orange sun was setting in the west. It was about to disappear into the horizon. The clouds around the Sol Dang Mountain were thick. The setting sun illuminated it with a golden-red color. The seemingly intoxicating scenery seemed to foreshadow a bloody disaster and massacre. Swoosh, swoosh. The 2 divine ships were not invisible. They swaggered across the sky and were about to cross the Sol Dang Mountain. The guards, scouts, and sentries guarding the pass noticed the appearance of the 2 divine ships and immediately sent out warnings and signals. In the blink of an eye, over 1,000 armored and sword-wielding guards flew into the sky aggressively to intercept the 2 divine warships. The leader of the Chili Arch and the general even issued a righteous warning. This is the Great Yan Empire's border. No trespassing or invasion. Please stop immediately and accept our inspection. Otherwise, we will kill you without mercy. Towards the people and divine warships from the Wind Frost Empire, the guards had always been on high alert. In the past few thousand years, many gods and divine ships of the Wind Frost Empire had passed through the Sol Dang Mountain and entered the Great Yan Empire. However, those godly spirits and godly warships had to be interrogated and made difficult for. After confirming that there was no threat, they were allowed to enter the Great Yan Empire. However, the guards did not expect that the 2 divine warships that came with such menacing momentum were filled with powerful cultivators that they could not afford to offend. The divine warship had no intention of stopping. It continued to fly forward. Over 1,000 soldiers immediately drew their swords and sabers, unleashing their divine abilities and secret arts in unison as they charged toward the 2 divine warships. However, the 2 divine battleships fired their cannons at the same time, releasing hundreds of dazzling beams of divine light. Boom 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 boom. The divine power light pillars that covered the sky shot out like a rain of arrows, drowning over 1,000 defenders. Muffled explosions could be heard one after another. Colorful divine light bloomed in the sky, and powerful shock waves burst forth. In the blink of an eye, over 1,000 defenders were smashed into smithereens and turned into ashes. Such a scene instantly infuriated the guards and generals of the Sol Dang Mountain. With furious roars and roars, at least 200 divine lords led more than 20,000 soldiers and charged at the 2 divine warships with great momentum. Since the other party was so fierce and ruthless, the defenders did not need to waste any more words. They had to destroy the 2 divine warships with all their might to avenge the dead defenders. An intense battle broke out. The 2 divine warships lit up with dazzling divine light. Not only did they form a defensive shield, but they also opened fire with all their might. They released hundreds of divine power light pillars that blasted toward the 20,000 defenders. In addition, 200 high-level godly lords also charged out of the divine warships. They had the mentality of making a contribution and bravely killing the enemy. They aggressively charged toward the defenders in the sky. Once the high-level godly lords attacked, it was naturally destructive. Divine light illuminated tens of thousands of miles. At that moment, the divine light torrent that covered the sky and the earth descended from the sky with the power to destroy everything. Not only did the 20,000 defenders turn pale with fright, but they were also filled with shock. Even the expressions of the 70,000 defenders, generals and commanders of the Soul Dang Mountain changed drastically. Rumble. The divine power that could destroy the heavens and the earth instantly defeated the defenders' attacks and destroyed their formation. In the first round of battle, more than 7,000 defenders died tragically under the attacks of the 200 godly lords. In addition, more than 3,000 defenders were also heavily injured and retreated pathetically. Endless divine blood splattered from the sky like a torrential downpour. It fell on the Soul Dang Mountain and dyed the forest and the earth red. Tragic howls, angry curses and cries of alarm, as well as the loud bangs of various sacred tree collisions, filled the heavens and the earth. It was deafening. The two deputy commanders made a prompt decision. They led the remaining 70,000 defenders and attacked the two divine warships and the 200 godly lords with all their might. Everyone knew that they had lost their composure this time. The Wind Frost Empire had actually sent out two divine warships and 200 high-level godly lords to launch a sneak attack on the Soul Dang Mountain. Everyone guessed that this was just the Wind Frost Empire's vanguard. Soon, the Wind Frost Empire's army would cross the Soul Dang Mountain and kill their way into the Great Yen Empire. Therefore, the 70,000 defenders fought bravely and swore to defend the border with their lives to buy time for the Empire's citizens. The longer they delayed, the faster the Empire would be able to react and deal with the situation after receiving the news. The earth-shattering battle affected a radius of tens of thousands of miles. The Soul Dang Mountain shook violently and many peaks collapsed. The Southern Protector General, who was cultivating in seclusion, was startled awake. He used his divine perception to scan the surrounding 20,000 miles. After seeing the situation of the battle, his expression became extremely gloomy, and his eyes were extremely solemn. He did not hesitate to take out a golden jade slip. After quickly inputting an encrypted message, he sent it out. This was the highest-grade communication jade slip. He would only use it when the situation was urgent and he was reporting to the Great Yen Emperor. After sending out the communication jade slip, the Southern Protector General donned his divine armor and held his divine spear. He strode out of the secret chamber and charged into the sky with a murderous aura. Those bastards from the Wind Frost Empire still haven't given up on destroying our empire. After 5,000 years, you actually took advantage of our unpreparedness and launched another attack. This time, if you want to cross the Soul Dang Mountain, you'll have to do it over my dead body. The Southern Protector General's aura was like a rainbow as he roared with a loud voice. His entire body bloomed with bloody flames that soared into the sky. His four wings flashed with divine light as he charged into the battlefield with unparalleled bravery. The remaining 70,000 defenders were infected by his aura. Their morale immediately soared and they charged forward without any regard for their own safety. The 200 high-level godly lords also attacked with all their might. They were determined to flatten the Soul Dang Mountain in the shortest time possible. After all, the Wind Frost Emperor was watching the battle from the divine warship. This was their chance to perform. Chapter 3276. The difference in numbers between the two sides was huge. The Wind Frost Empire only had 200 high-ranked divine lords. On the other hand, the Great Yen Empire had more than 100,000 people. However, the result of the battle was a shocking contrast. Since the start of the battle, the Great Yen Empire's defenders had been rapidly decreasing. In just 15 minutes, the Great Yen Empire's defenders had been reduced by half. There were only about 50,000 people left. Of course, the defenders who died first were slightly weaker and had less combat experience. The remaining 50,000 defenders were clearly more elite and had stronger combat strength. Even in the face of such heavy casualties, they were able to hold their ground and did not break down and flee. Under the command of the many defenders, the 50,000 defenders quickly formed a battle formation and worked together to resist the attacks of the 200 high-ranked divine lords. This was effective. The speed at which the defenders died decreased significantly. The momentum of the 200 high-ranked Divine Lords' attacks also weakened slightly. Seeing this, Yank was clearly a little impatient. He was invisible and stayed in the Wind Frost Emperor's personal secret chamber, observing the situation on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the Wind Frost Emperor sat in the main hall of the warship, waiting for Yank's orders to command the many Divine Lords to fight. The Imperial Guard Inspector and the 18 Reverends were also standing in the main hall, waiting for orders. "I'm in a hurry. Don't waste time with those small fries. End the battle quickly." Yank sent the order to the Wind Frost Emperor with his divine sense. The Wind Frost Emperor hurriedly replied, "Yes, sir." Then he ordered the many Divine Lords, ordering 100 high-ranked Divine Lords to participate in the battle. The 100 Divine Lords who stayed in the 2 divine warships were already ready to go. They were just waiting for the Wind Frost Emperor's order. They could not wait to charge out of the warships, brandishing their divine weapons and sharp swords. The 40,000 defenders of the Sol Dang Mountain thought that the Wind Frost Empire's vanguard only had 200 high-ranked Divine Lords. Even so, they would definitely not be able to hold on. In less than an hour they would be slaughtered. However, they did not expect another 100 Divine Lord experts to appear halfway. In their shock and horror, the defenders' morale was affected, and their battle formation was clearly deformed. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Rumble. With the addition of the 100 high Divine Lords, the light of divine arts that blotted out the sky and covered the earth poured down in torrents, and the tens of thousands of defenders were instantly annihilated. At least tens of thousands of defenders were crushed by the light of the divine spell, and blood splattered all over the sky. Deafening booms and heart-wrenching screams reverberated endlessly between heaven and earth. When 300 high Divine Lords joined forces to attack, their momentum reached its peak. It was truly unstoppable. As for the remaining 30,000 soldiers, they immediately collapsed and were mercilessly massacred. After a short 7 minutes, the battle was over. More than 30,000 soldiers were slaughtered, leaving almost no survivors. After all, those celestial deity realm guards could not escape beyond a radius of 10,000 miles at all. Even the aftermath of the battle could blast them into pieces. The one who fought alone and bathed in blood to the end was the Southern Guardian General. But under the besiegement of more than 20 high-level Divine Lords, he only lasted 3 moves before he was completely killed. With the death of the Southern Protector General, the battle had come to an end. The Sol Dang Mountain was razed to the ground, and the surrounding 30,000 miles were turned into ruins. Many towering peaks no longer existed. 100,000 soldiers and many generals were buried here. The ruined battlefield was dyed red with the blood of the 100,000 soldiers. There were divine weapons scattered all over the battlefield, as well as many armors, equipment and interspatial rings. The 300 high Divine Lords followed the usual practice of cleaning up the battlefield and collecting the spoils of war. In this battle they did not suffer heavy losses. Only a few 7th Heaven Realm Godlords died in battle, and over 30 people were injured. Compared to the rich spoils of war, they had profited greatly. However, the Wind Frost Emperor ordered everyone to quickly return to the divine ship and continue advancing. Such an abnormal order made the 300 high Divine Lords feel strange. This did not seem like a battle. How could there be such a thing as not cleaning up the battlefield and counting the spoils of war after a bloody battle? However, the Wind Frost Emperor was high and mighty, so naturally he would not open his mouth to explain. The Imperial Guard Governor hurriedly stepped forward and explained to the 300 high Divine Lords, "Why did we send so few elite soldiers to attack the Great Yen Empire? It's because we want to fight a surprise blitzkrieg battle. Any delay will delay the battle and affect His Majesty's plan." Hearing this, the 300 high Divine Lords were enlightened. Everyone guessed that the Wind Frost Emperor's target was most likely the imperial capital of the Great Yen Empire or a very important treasure land. Therefore, the high Divine Lords gave up on collecting the spoils of war and quickly returned to the divine ship. Swoosh, swoosh. The 2 divine ships set off again as fast as lightning, cutting through the night and heading north. At the same time, the imperial capital of the Great Yen Empire. Night had just fallen, but the imperial capital was still brightly lit and bustling. The imperial palace was also brightly lit and people were moving about. Emperor Yen Yongning was handling government affairs in his study. He looked solemn and his brows were tightly knitted. Ever since the incident at the Green Jade Palace, almost all the high divine lords of the 50 forces had been wiped out. Not only had the high divine lords of the various sects and families all died in the Green Jade Palace, but so had the royal family's experts. Even the patriarch of the Yan family, Yan Tiangang, had not returned. Yan Yongning had sent the Black Flame governor and a large group of imperial guards to the Cloud Sea secret land to find Yan Tiangang and the others. In the end, the Black Flame governor and the others reported that the Green Jade Palace had disappeared. As for Yan Tiangang and the others, they had also disappeared without a trace, as if they had evaporated into thin air. Yan Yongning had no choice but to go to the ancestral hall to check on Yan Tiangong's soul lamp. In the end, Yan Tiangong's soul lamp had been extinguished, which meant that he had died. The failure of the Green Jade Palace had greatly reduced the number of high divine lords of the Great Yan Empire. In particular, the death of Yan Tiangang and many other royal family experts had weakened the royal family's power even more. Even though Yan Yongning's biggest problem, Prince Lian, had also been killed by Ji Tianxing. However, compared to the loss of the Great Yan Empire, this gain was really insignificant. After nearly 2 months, Yan Yongning gradually recovered from this heavy blow. However, he was still in a bad mood and his temper was even more irritable than before. Suddenly, a golden divine light descended from the sky and landed in front of Yan Yongning. Swoosh! The golden light stopped and a golden jade slip appeared, spinning slowly. Seeing this jade slip with mysterious patterns carved on it, Yan Yongning's body stiffened and a trace of gloominess flashed in his eyes. An emergency message from the Southern Guardian General? Did something happen at the Soldang Mountain camp? Yan Yongning frowned and had a bad premonition. He quickly reached out and grabbed the jade slip. He cast a spell to open the seal on the jade slip and used his immortal will to read the information in the jade slip. The jade slip was indeed sent by the Southern Guardian General. The content was very simple and there was only one sentence. However, that one sentence made Yan Yongning's expression change drastically, as if he had been struck by lightning. Chapter 3277. At that moment, Yan Yongning's face was ashen. His eyes were as cold as ice and his entire body was bursting with anger. 5,100 years. The two countries have been at peace for 5,000 years. That damned Wind Frost Emperor, why did he start a war at this juncture? That despicable bastard. He must have received some news that his country is suffering a serious setback. That's why he's taking advantage of the situation. Yan Yongning roared angrily. The veins on his forehead were throbbing and his face was somewhat ferocious. In the past, even if the Wind Frost Empire started a war, he would not be afraid or retreat. Although the Great Yan Empire was slightly weaker, it was not a big problem as the defending side. However, it was different now. The Great Yan Empire had just suffered a heavy blow, and the Wind Frost Empire had launched a surprise attack. If it was not handled properly, the Great Yan Empire's situation would definitely worsen. If it was light, the country's fortune would be greatly damaged and they would lose their cities and land. If it was heavy, the experts would wither and millions of soldiers would be slaughtered, causing many kingdoms to be uneasy. In short, this was an extremely severe test. The fate of the Great Yan Empire might very well be rewritten. After taking a few deep breaths, Yan Yongning forced himself to calm down. He frowned and analyzed the situation. 200 high-level divine lords as the vanguard? The Wind Frost Empire has really put in a lot of effort. The 100,000 soldiers guarding the Soldang Mountain will definitely not be able to withstand it. They will probably be slaughtered in 4 to 6 hours. Even if I immediately order the troops from the nearby kingdoms to rush over to help, there will not be enough time. General Zhenan also knows this, so he did not ask for help from me. Instead, he asked me to be on guard. I think the general is prepared to sacrifice himself for the country. Thinking of this, Yan Yongning's face darkened. He hurriedly summoned the Grand Marshal, the Imperial Guard Governor, and a dozen generals to the study to discuss the military situation. A moment later, they received an urgent order from Yan Yongning and rushed over as fast as they could. After a few minutes, the highest-ranking generals of the Great Yan Empire were all present. Everyone had a premonition that something extremely serious had happened. Their expressions and moods were very grave. Yan Yongning explained the situation in a low voice. He decisively gave the orders and gave the generals their tasks. The Wind Frost Empire is coming fiercely. We will definitely lose the Seoul Dang Mountain tonight. General Zhenan might also sacrifice himself for the country. The only thing the 100,000 defenders can do is buy time for us. Immediately send a message to Yinan Divine Kingdom, gather the army and experts as quickly as possible, and rush to the Yanling mountain range in the middle of the Divine Kingdom to intercept the vanguard of the Wind Frost Empire. In addition, issue an order in my name to all the divine nations to gather their armies and gather at the Imperial City in the shortest time possible to defend the Imperial City. Yan Yongning had also guessed that the target of the Frost Empire's surprise attack was most likely the Imperial City. He ordered the various countries along the way to send their armies to intercept the 2 divine warships of the Wind Frost Empire. At the same time, he also mobilized a large number of experts and armies from other divine nations to rush to the Imperial City to protect the Emperor. He calmly gave out order after order, giving the Grand Marshals and Grand Generals their respective tasks. Everyone didn't waste any more time. After accepting the mission, they left the study room to carry out their orders. After everyone left, Yan Yongning was the only one left in the study. At this time, a black shadow emerged from the corner of the study and stood behind Yan Yongning respectfully. Your Majesty, the Frost Empire has been accumulating strength for 5,000 years. Taking advantage of this opportunity to launch a surprise attack, it will definitely not be that simple. With 200 upper divine lords as the vanguard, there must be 1,000,000 troops behind them. With the current situation of our country, it is absolutely impossible to resist the invasion of the Frost Empire. We can only stall for time. Perhaps within a month, the army of the Frost Empire will reach the Imperial City. This person was the Heian governor Yan Yongning's absolute confidant. After hearing this, Yan Yongning was not angry. Instead, he nodded in agreement. That's right. What you said I have already expected. Therefore, the deployment I made just now was only to do my best to stall for time. If we really want to resolve this war and avoid casualties, we can only ask the Domain Lord to step in. The Heian governor pondered for a moment before nodding in agreement. Although the Domain Lord is in seclusion all year round, his whereabouts are very mysterious. However, he has long ordered that in order to maintain the peace and stability of the Tianbei region, the empires are prohibited from launching a full-scale war. As long as Your Majesty reports this matter to the Domain Lord, he will definitely intervene. Yan Yongning did not say anything more and immediately left the study room, heading to the underground palace of the Imperial Palace. In the underground palace, there was a secret room that was sealed all year round. There was an altar inside that was specifically used to communicate with the ruler of the Northern Heaven Protectorate. Of course, Yan Yongning did not dare to open the secret room unless the situation was critical and he had no other choice. And now the situation was imminent. He had no choice but to open the secret room and ask the Domain Lord for help through the communication altar. 2 days passed in a flash. The 2 divine warships of the Frost Empire sped through the territory of the Southern Yi Divine Kingdom without encountering any resistance. After all, the guards and powerhouses of the various counties were very weak. They could not even detect the whereabouts of the divine warships, so how could they intercept them? It was late at night. The sky was dotted with stars and the moon was bright. Inside the divine warship, the Frost Emperor stood in the secret room, bowing respectfully as he reported to Yank. My lord, the Yanling mountain range is 500,000 miles ahead. That's a major pass in the central part of the Southern Yi Divine Kingdom, and it's also the only way for us to go north. With the great Yan Emperor's style of doing things, he will definitely deploy a large number of troops in the Yanling mountain range to intercept us. Yanku sat cross-legged on the divine jade chair, closing his eyes and meditating. In truth, he had been using a heaven-monitoring divine ability secret technique to investigate the situation within a radius of 40,000 miles. Along the way, he had searched everywhere but did not find his target. However, he firmly believed that Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu and Lan Er's auras were very special. As long as they appeared within 40,000 miles of him, they would not be able to escape his detection. After a moment of silence, Yank said expressionlessly, "There's no need to waste time. Cross the Yanling mountain range as soon as possible. Don't delay my business." The Frost Emperor immediately bowed and said, "This old servant understands." Then the Frost Emperor left the secret room to pass on the order. Yank did not move at all and continued to use his divine ability secret technique. Meanwhile, A pitch-black divine warship sped south from the north and was about to reach the Yanling mountain range. There was only a black-haired, white-robed human youth in the cockpit of the divine warship. He flew alone on the divine warship, but his divine sense spread out to investigate the situation within a radius of 30,000 miles. When he saw tens of thousands of godly spirits gathered in the towering mountain range ahead, he could not help but frown with a puzzled expression. What's happening in the southern Yi Divine Kingdom? Why is it that on my way down south I see armies from all the prefectures moving out and converging towards the south? Chapter 3278. There was no doubt that this person was Ji Tianxing. Not long ago he parted ways with Chao Qingyu and Lan Er and drove the divine ship south. Yun Yao, Ji Ku Zhen Hong, and the others were cultivating in seclusion in the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. Lin Shui, Lord Blood Illusion, and the others were cultivating in the secret room of the divine ship. Everyone was busy improving their strength, so Ji Tianxing did not disturb them. He drove the divine ship alone. On the way he also thought of his next plan. Tianbei region was at the northernmost tip of the boundless heaven continent. He wanted to leave Tianbei region and fly south until he left the boundless heaven continent. After leaving the boundless heaven continent he would fly southeast. After crossing the two seas and Reincarnation Island he would reach the chaotic continent. 1,000 years ago his territory, the Tianshan region, was on that continent. Even though he and his friends and family had died in the Great War of the Gods 1,000 years ago, he still had old subordinates in the Tianshan region, as well as countless loyal experts and guards. On the primal chaos continent he also had some close friends who valued friendship and loyalty. Even though 1,000 years had passed and the divine world had changed, he still wanted to return to the chaotic continent to take a look. He wanted to know if his former subordinates and guards as well as those close friends were still alive. If they were still alive, would they be willing to follow him and help him take revenge and return to the peak? Even if his former subordinates and friends were no longer around, he still wanted to go back and revisit his old home as a way of reminiscing and paying respects. Of course, this was only a preliminary plan. He also thought of another possibility. If he broke through to the Divine King realm on the way to the chaotic continent, he would change his plan. He would choose to enter Reincarnation Island and head to the Dragon Realm through the spatial passage to find Ji Wuhan first. Anyway, he was now a 9th-level Divine Lord and would become a peak Divine Lord soon. He would break through to the Divine King realm. And he would need at least 2 to 3 years to go from the boundless heaven continent to the chaotic continent. If the journey was not smooth, it was possible to spend decades or centuries. With these thoughts and plans, Ji Tianxing was full of anticipation for the future journey. Unknowingly, he entered Yinan's divine kingdom 3 days ago. On the way, he noticed that the situation in the Yinan divine kingdom was rather tense. Many county cities had sent out their elite armies to the south at full speed. They seemed to be converging in one direction. At that time, Ji Tianxing felt that something was strange and guessed that something had happened in Yinan's divine kingdom. Tonight, when he reached the Yanling mountain range, he came to a sudden realization. Hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers from various counties and more than 1,000 divine emperors gathered at the Yanling mountain range. They formed a mighty defensive formation. Ji Tianxing had the divine warship stop above the Yanling mountain range, floating in the clouds. He looked down at the tens of thousands of miles of mountain range and thought to himself, Yinan divine nation wouldn't start a war for no reason, nor would they gather 600,000 soldiers here. Unless they were being invaded by a powerful enemy and had no choice but to summon an army to defend themselves. The South Yi Kingdom was located in the southernmost part of the Great Yan Empire. Further south was the border. Beyond the border was the Wind Frost Empire. Could it be that the Wind Frost Empire's army is here? With that in mind, Ji Tianxing guessed the answer. He was 80% sure. The Great Yan Empire and the Wind Frost Empire are old enemies. They haven't fought for nearly 5,000 years. But before that, the two empires had been fighting for more than 20,000 years. Moreover, the incident at the Green Jade Palace caused the Great Yan Empire's top experts to wither. More than 300 mid-level and high-level divine emperors died. The Wind Frost Empire must have sensed the decline of the Great Yan Empire's power, so they took the opportunity to attack. The relationship between the two empires wasn't complicated. Ji Tianxing guessed the answer and the truth after little analysis. He didn't want to care about these mundane matters and just left. However, he hesitated for a while and decided to stay and observe the situation. After all, Yan Yongning had helped him before. He had allowed him to enter the library and read the great Yan Empire's precious books. He had gone to the Green Jade Palace, ruined Yan Yongning's 9-year plan, snatched the king-level materials in the palace, and released the suppressed Lan. That series of events had caused more than 300 divine emperors of the great Yan Empire to die. Even Yan Tiangang had been killed by him. Speaking of which, he still felt guilty toward Yan Yongning and the great Yan Empire. Now that the great Yan Empire's power was weak, the invasion of the Wind Frost Empire's army was related to him. Therefore, he decided to observe the situation. If possible, he was willing to help resist the invasion of the Wind Frost Empire. This way it could be considered a compensation to Yan Yongning. Just as he made up his mind, the 600,000 soldiers in the Yanling mountain range had already arranged themselves into battle formations. A total of 15 battle formations were distributed in the mountain range within a radius of 50,000 miles, waiting for the enemy. Not long after, 2 beams of divine light flew over from the southern night sky, carrying with them a terrifyingly powerful divine might. Ji Tianxing used his divine perception to check and found that it was 2 divine warships. It's not the Wind Frost Empire's army? There are only 2 divine warships. How many people can it hold? A few hundred at most, less than 1,000? Ji Tianxing frowned, feeling puzzled. In the next instant, the army also discovered the arrival of the 2 divine warships. Under the command of the many divine lords, the 100,000 soldiers attacked the 2 divine warships together. The 2 divine warships did not slow down at all, nor did they have any intention of dodging. The 2 divine warships opened fire with all their might, releasing hundreds of divine power light pillars that poured down from the night sky. At the same time, more than 200 dazzling divine lights flew out from the divine warships. They were more than 200 high-level divine lords brimming with killing intent. All of them brandished their divine weapons and unleashed earth-shattering divine abilities as they launched an attack. A great battle with a great disparity in numbers instantly broke out. After Ji Tianxing used his divine perception to see the 200 divine lords clearly, a look of relief appeared in his eyes. No wonder 2 divine warships dared to invade the great Yan Empire and made the Yinan Divine Kingdom so nervous that they mobilized 600,000 soldiers to resist. It turns out that the Wind Frost Empire's vanguard is actually more than 200 high-ranked divine lords. Such a powerful vanguard is enough to sweep through everything and slaughter the 600,000-strong army. Seeing the strength realm of those divine lords, Ji Tianxing predicted the result. If he did not make a move to help, the 600,000 soldiers would be wiped out in at most 4 hours. After all, a high-ranked divine lord could take on thousands of celestial deity realm soldiers. With more than 200 high-ranked divine lords joining hands, even low-ranked divine kings had the chance to kill. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing decisively put away the divine warships. He took out the Sword of Burial of Heaven, entered stealth state and quietly flew toward the battlefield, launching a surprise attack at the nearest dozen or so high-ranked divine lords. It was also at this time inside the Wind Frost Emperor's divine warship. Yank, who was sitting in a secret chamber, suddenly opened his eyes, revealing a thick look of pleasant surprise. It's him. Damn little bastard actually delivered himself to my doorstep. The heavens are really helping me, ha. Chapter 3279. After entering Yinan's divine kingdom, Yank had been using his mystic arts to search for Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu and Lan Er's auras along the way. Even though this was like finding a needle in a haystack. However, he thought that the 300 high-ranked divine lords would definitely cause panic in the great Yan Empire if they went all the way north and slaughtered many soldiers. Experts like Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu and Lan Er would most likely rush over to help once they heard the news. At the very least, they would come personally to check the situation. After all, the 3 of them were citizens of the great Yan Empire and had some feelings for the great Yan Empire. This way, Yank would have a chance to capture Ji Tianxing and kill Chao Qingyu and Lan. However, this was only his plan. He did not have enough confidence to ensure that it would succeed or when it would succeed. And now the surprise came too suddenly. Yank was completely unprepared and suddenly detected Ji Tianxing's tracks. He was instantly overjoyed. His first reaction was to charge out of the divine warship and personally injure Ji Tianxing, seal him and capture him. After all, Ji Tianxing knew the secrets of the Yan family like the back of his hand. Yank had to capture him and get to the bottom of this matter. If Ji Tianxing refused to speak, Then he would kill Ji Tianxing and refine his soul memories. However, this thought flashed through Yang's mind. He immediately realized what was going on. Ji Tianxing was very strong and comparable to a low-level divine king. He was cunning and skilled in all kinds of mystic arts. It would not be easy to injure and capture him in a short time. Under such circumstances, those 200+ high divine lords would be put to good use. Thinking of this, Yang hurriedly used his consciousness to send a voice transmission to the Wind Frost Emperor. Pass down the order. Half of the people will resist the siege of the army. The other half will gradually gather in the northwest direction. In that area there's a human youth in white robes. We must surround him at all costs. In the Great Hall, the Wind Frost Emperor, who was commanding the battle, immediately replied with a voice transmission, "Understood." Then he conveyed Yang's instructions to the divine emperors. The battlefield under the night sky quickly changed. The attacks of the 200+ high divine lords had clearly weakened somewhat. Half of the divine lords continued to cast spells to resist the encirclement of the army and quickly slaughtered the defenders. As for the other half of the divine lords, they quickly rushed towards the northwest while killing the defenders, forming a huge encirclement. These high divine lords all had new missions and goals. It was a human youth in a white robe. No matter the cost, they had to surround him and prevent him from escaping. Meanwhile, Ji Tianxing had already started a massacre on the battlefield, sweeping everything in his path. His figure was erratic like a ghost or a phantom, appearing and disappearing in the sky. Every time his figure flickered, he would release a sword light that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, scattering it toward a few dozen high-level divine lords. This incomparably wondrous sword technique bloomed with dazzling 5-colored divine light, releasing a destructive might that contained the power of more than 100 divine Dao laws. Any high-level divine lord that was enveloped by the sword light would find it difficult to escape, unable to escape even if they had wings. Those who were lucky enough to avoid death were only heavily injured by the sword light or had their arms or legs severed. Those who were seriously injured had their divine bodies destroyed by the sword light, turning into a bloody mist that filled the air. There were even some unlucky high-level divine lords. Not only were their divine bodies destroyed, their divine cores were also shattered, countless fragments falling to the ground. Ji Tianxing was like an unparalleled sharp blade, freely moving about the battlefield and wantonly slicing apart the enemy's formation. His speed was extremely fast, making it impossible to guard against. His strength was extremely strong, his killing power terrifying. Many high-level divine lords were unable to block him. In a short 100 breaths of time, Ji Tianxing had killed more than 30 high-level divine lords and injured more than 40. Such a shocking battle record caused the high-level divine lords to tremble in fear. While they were terrified, they were also puzzled. Who is that white-robed brat? A super fierce general of the Great Yan Empire? His strength is so terrifying. Even peak divine lords can't be as strong as him. He's not a Great Yan god but a human. Why is he working for the Great Yan Empire? The Great Yan Empire only has a few peak divine lords, but that brat is definitely not one of them. Who exactly is he? No wonder His Majesty the Emperor ordered us to surround that fellow with all our strength. If we still don't stop him, our men will all be killed by him. Many high-level divine lords swiftly killed the surrounding guards and increased their speed to shrink the encirclement. As they exclaimed, they were full of doubts, discussing and asking questions as they executed arts to kill Ji Tianxing. Soon another 100 breaths of time passed. During this period of time, Ji Tianxing assassinated another 13 high-level divine lords and injured more than 20 people. However, more than 80 high-level divine lords completed the encirclement, shrinking the encirclement to a radius of 250 miles. In this encirclement, only Ji Tianxing remained. All the guards had been killed. The divine senses of more than 80 high-level divine lords locked onto Ji Tianxing as they attacked him with all their might. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Dazzling divine light and overwhelming divine art light poured down on Ji Tianxing like a torrential flood. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing immediately frowned, his eyes flashing coldly. He was not worried or afraid. Even if those high-level divine lords joined forces to attack him, as long as he used the infinite sky of chaos, he would definitely be able to escape this calamity. However, he sensed that something was amiss and vaguely guessed something. I've killed so many divine lords consecutively, causing them to panic. That's why they joined forces to attack me. This makes sense. However, more than 200 divine lords did not panic. They had a clear division of labor. Half of them will fend off the army while the other half will attack me. This is definitely not an improvisation. Someone must be commanding and making arrangements in advance. Who is it? Within the Wind Frost Empire, who would recognize me and know that I pose a great threat. Moreover, this person has a high status and can command and order 300 high-level divine lords. Ji Tianxing acutely sensed that there was a problem here. The first answer that appeared in his mind was the Wind Frost Emperor. Only the Wind Frost Emperor could command and control 300 high-level divine lords. However, why would the Wind Frost Emperor personally lead an expedition and personally charge into the Great Yan Empire's territory? This did not make sense at all. Thinking up to here, another thought appeared in Ji Tianxing's mind. Unless there's a mastermind behind the Wind Frost Emperor. He vaguely guessed something and released his divine sense to probe the two divine ships in the distance. However, those two divine ships only had 10-odd high-level divine lord auras. Among them, the strongest ones were merely 2 peak divine lords. The person he guessed was not in the 2 divine ships. Infinite Sky of Chaos. In the next instant, Ji Tianxing used his trump card, his body becoming transparent and blurry. Chapter 3280. The first round of attacks from more than 80 high divine lords had been neutralized by Ji Tianxing just like that. He was completely unharmed and ignored the surrounding high divine lords as he continued to search for that person's aura. At this moment, a white spatial fissure suddenly tore open in the night sky 10,000 feet behind him. A pitch-black saber light with golden divine flames silently appeared and ruthlessly slashed down. This saber light was 10,000 feet long and almost tangible. Contained 109 types of law divine power. Its speed was as fast as an aurora and its might could split the heavens and earth. It was terrifying and unfathomable. No one below the Divine King realm could dodge this saber. Ji Tianxing was no exception. He had just realized that danger was approaching and wanted to teleport away before he could turn back to look. But he was still a bit too slow. Swish. The 1,000-foot saber light ruthlessly slashed down, passing through Ji Tianxing's transparent figure and cleaving him in two. The saber light seemed to be completely unaffected and its speed did not decrease in the slightest as it slashed down on the mountains and earth. Following an earth-shattering rumble, a dozen mountains were split in half and a 10,000-mile-long gully appeared in the ground. A super earthquake erupted and the surrounding 20,000 miles of earth cracked open, shaking violently for a long time. At least 30,000 soldiers were unlucky enough to die under the saber light, and were reduced to ashes. Such a destructive saber light had already far exceeded the scope of a divine lord expert and far exceeded the imagination of the hundreds of thousands of guards. In that instant, the 400,000 guards who were lucky enough to survive were shocked and dumbfounded. Even the 220 high divine lords were given a fright. They revealed expressions of shock and horror as they let out cries of surprise. Many people thought that the Wind Frost Emperor had personally taken action. But on second thought, even if the Wind Frost Emperor had taken action, it was impossible for him to have such terrifying might. Countless people looked up at the night sky, searching everywhere for the person who had unleashed the saber. However, no super-strong cultivators appeared in the night sky that was filled with divine light. Even the blurry and transparent Ji Tianxing had disappeared. 20,000 miles away, atop a ruined mountain, Ji Tianxing, dressed in a white robe, held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand and was coughing violently. His face was pale and blood was foaming from his mouth. His divine power was in a mess. Obviously, the power of the saber light that had suddenly appeared had instantly broken through the limits of everlasting chaos's defense. As a result, his endless sky of turbidity was broken and he was injured. Fortunately, he had been vigilant and prepared beforehand, so his injuries weren't too serious. In addition, the appearance of the mysterious saber light also confirmed his guess, making him even more certain of the answer. "Yank! You cowardly scoundrel, get out here for this king." Ji Tianxing exerted his power to suppress his injuries, then flew back up into the night sky and let out a deep roar like a bell. The sound waves were deafening in the night sky. Not only were the several 100,000 soldiers stunned, but the 200-plus high divine lords were also very confused. The same thought appeared in everyone's mind. "Yank? Who's Yank? Both sides had a preliminary understanding of Ji Tianxing. The several 100,000 soldiers of the Southern Yi divine nation thought that he was one of them, a super expert loyal to the great Yan Empire. With such an expert in charge, the army, which had been in a state of panic before, immediately calmed down and became much more confident. Meanwhile, the 200-plus high divine lords of the Wind Frost Empire thought that Ji Tianxing was the great Yan Empire's guardian, and also the person that the emperor had ordered to surround and suppress. However, no one could understand why he would shout out an unfamiliar name in such an aggressive manner. Just as everyone was puzzled, the Wind Frost Emperor appeared. He flew out of the divine warship and streaked across the night sky as fast as lightning, landing outside the encirclement with awe-inspiring might. At this moment he was wearing the dark golden dragon armor. His entire body was covered in armor, and only a pair of eyes could be seen from under the helmet. He held the dark golden divine sword in his hand and pointed at Ji Tianxing with murderous intent. Human brat, you only have two choices now. Either you surrender or I kill you. Ji Tianxing glanced at him and sneered. Wind Frost Emperor, you're not qualified to be my opponent. I don't care if you consider Yank as your backer or if you've been enslaved by him. Tell him to come out. I'm going to twist his head off. Although he had fought Yank for more than half a month in the battle at the Green Jade Palace, he had been severely injured in the end. However, after recovering from his injuries and returning to his peak state, his strength had also increased a little. Now he also wanted to fight Yank head-on. He wanted to see how big the gap was between him and Yank, who was in the Fourth King God realm. However, Yank had been hiding in the alternate dimension, ready to launch a fatal attack at any time. The Wind Frost Emperor would not let him do as he wished. He decisively waved his hand and gave the order to attack. You lunatic, don't talk nonsense. Everyone listen up. Kill this bastard with all your might. After saying that, the Wind Frost Emperor took the lead and waved his dark golden divine sword. 9 golden sword lights shot towards Ji Tianxing. More than 80 high-level divine lords also shouted and charged forward without any regard for their own safety. Suddenly, endless dazzling divine light covered the night sky for tens of thousands of miles. Thousands of divine light rays, carrying the power to destroy everything, poured down on Ji Tianxing. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing could only use all his strength to activate his defensive shield and teleport to avoid most of the divine light rays. However, there were too many of them. They had formed a circle around him. Thousands of divine light rays came from all directions, densely packed like rain. Even if he used all his strength, he could only dodge half of the attacks. However, he was still struck by the divine light that filled the sky. The golden shield that enveloped his body made muffled bangs from the bombardment. Although he had successfully blocked this round of attacks, the golden shield was broken. However, the golden shield was shattered and he had used up too much of his divine power. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. At the same time, the night sky above his head silently split open a spatial crack. 12 dark golden saber auras that were more than 3,000 meters long slashed down with unparalleled sharpness and power that could cut through everything. The sword lights were extremely fast and were about to hit Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing was already prepared. He instantly took out the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and covered himself. Boom. Boom boom boom. The 12 terrifying sword lights fiercely hit the black light shield of the divine pagoda, creating earth-shattering sounds. The black light shield violently fluctuated, bursting with black light ripples, releasing an ice-cold aura. However, the shield did not shatter. The 12 sword